All right, council members, we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to call this meeting of the Early Learning Council to order. Thank you all for being here. This is our November 19th meeting. Really appreciate you being here. Just a couple of logistical opening announcements as folks are getting settled. There's coffee and tea and beverages. Please help yourself. If you need to use the facilities, they are outside the door to the office suite and to the left, both for men's and women's, and you need a code, and it's on the whiteboard behind you. So be sure to memorize that before you go down there. All right, so I think that's it in terms of logistics. We will take a formal break at some point. We're scheduled to adjourn at 1, and we do have lunch that will be coming in for council members. So with that, can I have Alyssa start with the roll call, please?
Curtis.
Here.
Harriet Adair. Martha Brooks.
Here.
Janet Doherty Smith.
Here.
Tim Freeman.
Here.
Khalid Thorne Ladd.
Here.
Charles McGee.
Here.
Eva Ripito. Here. Lynn Saxton. Terry Tallhofer. Bobby Weber.
Here.
Marlene will not be joining us, neither will Salon.
Oh, great, thank you. So we know that Terry is stuck in traffic, and we are expecting Lynn for sure. So hopefully we'll have them join us before too long. So on our agenda today, council members, just a couple of reminders. We are operationalizing a consent agenda as per our agreement at the retreat and before, which means that we're understanding that you've come fully prepared and having read your materials. And on the consent agenda, we will just adopt those items in unless there is objection or desire to pull those off. So we'll give you an opportunity to do that a little bit later in the agenda. Otherwise, we have some discussion items following just kind of the updates from Megan and myself. We want to hear what we're hearing out in the community about the mixed delivery preschool. Staff has been out, many of you have been out as well. I'm listening to community members about the mixed delivery preschool, which is in our slate of activities going forward. So we want to get an update about that. We'd like to have some conversation about there's some policy issues, frankly, that are being raised out in the community, and we need to have some conversation about that. We won't act on any of those today. We do have an action item on our agenda, which Eva will cover, related to mixed delivery preschool, and that is the proposed criteria that is behind tab number 2. I know you've all had a chance to look at that, and our action item today will be whether or not we find this proposed set of criteria acceptable. Otherwise, we'll have some conversation about what we're hearing, but and there'll be lots of opportunity for action and decision making coming up. But the one item related to action today on that is the proposed criteria. We also have action items related to the teen parent drug and alcohol program rules. Bobby will carry that. That's behind tab number 3 in your binder. We have some conversation that Martha, as chair of the Best Beginnings Committee, will cover related to the budget note for home visiting that we have, and we have a report coming up to the legislature after the first of the year. So Martha will give us an update about that, and then our consent agenda, and then we'll have an opportunity for public testimony. So if you're here from the public and you haven't signed in, please do so. There's a sign-in sheet in the back and a separate sign-in sheet if you want to provide public testimony to the council. I think we do have a piece of written public testimony, right? And we'll distribute that during the time for public testimony. Okay, council members, anything that's not on the agenda that you think needs to be reflected today? Okay. Hearing none, we'll go ahead and get started. So first on the agenda is the chair's report. So a couple of things. I want to take the opportunity to thank Marlene, even though she's not here. She's in a hearing today, and if she gets done in time, we anticipate that she's going to text Alyssa, and we'll log her into the phone. And the reason I want to do that is to thank her and say goodbye, because this is her last meeting. So her term has expired, and she's made the decision that she's not wanting to re-up her term and spend more time with her family. So we will send her a lovely parting gift that looks like the other lovely parting gifts we've given folks over the years, but she won't actually be in appearance. We won't see her, so hopefully we'll get a chance to thank her on the phone. So then I also, Marlene has been doing a fantastic job, not just as a council member, but in chairing our equity committee. And as you know, council members, we've been minus a chair of the equity committee, and we've been going round and round about how we fill that slot. And so I'm pleased to announce that Terry, who's not yet here but who will be, has agreed to chair the equity committee. And one of the very cool things about that is that Terry is one of the council members who comes from a part of our state where the majority of children under the age of 6 are kids of color. That's eventually going to be the case for all of us, but there are big pockets of our state for which that is the case now. She also happens to live in a part of the state that has some of our poorest communities. So we feel really pleased that she has been willing to step up and say yes to that. So we'll thank her publicly when she arrives as well. Earlier this week, there was the CCO conference, and we had a convening on Monday night. That was a joint convening of CCO folks and early learning folks. And it was Janet was able to be there, Megan was there, I was there. It was a very, I think, exciting, fruitful conversation and a really nice way to kick off the work that we have in our strategic plan about continuing really closer alignment with the healthcare community. So we are planning a joint meeting with the Oregon Health Policy Board, which we tentatively have scheduled for February, right? Or maybe February? Is that right? Okay. I said that, I went, oh my gosh, I think maybe it's January. So February. But it was I think it was a really fruitful conversation. We've heard lots of compliments from that. Janet, is there anything you want to add from your participation in that evening?
Was it NAS, the keynote speakers?
Mm-hmm. Sandra Samuels from the North Side Achievement Zone in Minneapolis.
Right, the North Side, the NAS.
The NAS, yep.
I thought it was inspiring. Not that you don't hear it a lot, but just the way she delivered was really good. Her real takeaway thing is we all have to say these are our kids. These are all our kids, and maybe you just want to stand up and clap. She was dynamic, and then it did lead into the rest of the discussions that we had.
So next on my list to just sort of announce and see if you have questions, the executive committee is sunsetting our hub metrics committee. It has done its job, and it has done it really well. And so the last meeting, David, was held 2 weeks ago of the Hub Metrics Committee. And we intend to bring back to the council a charter and a recommendation for an ongoing committee around measuring success. So we've had lots of conversation here at the council, at our retreat, about the importance of data and getting the right kind of data to measure the progress that we're making. And so the executive committee felt like we really needed an ongoing look at that. And it certainly is about the hubs, but it's also about the bigger issues around measuring. And we have measuring success and measuring progress. And we have challenges, some pretty substantial challenges in early learning around data, and particularly for some populations of kids, we even have more challenges. So having a dedicated committee focused on that will be a recommendation coming to you from the executive committee. We'll have a charter, and we anticipate bringing that to you in the next meeting or so. So just wanted to give you a heads up about that. So that's, yes, Khalid.
Has there already been outreach to some people
No.
about
No, it's just the executive committee made that determination at the last meeting, and so this is early heads up. There's been no outreach. This is just kind of the early announcement. You all, as a council, need to act on the charter for that committee, and we'll do the same sort of outreach.
I was going to say, would you want the council to do outreach to try and
Absolutely.
find members?
Yep,
Or-
absolutely. We don't have the processes set up.
Yeah.
It's that new.
Okay.
But I think we wanted to get the word out as quickly as possible that that's the intention, at least of the executive committee and hopefully the council. All right, other questions or feedback or comments about any of the items that I touched on? Okay, we'll turn it over to Megan then for the director's report.
Sure. Mine's going to be brief because there's so much content to get through today, and I'm actually really excited for you guys to get to the next part of your agenda where you'll get to hear about the incredible feedback that we've been getting from communities and stakeholders all across Oregon on the preschool promise. Our team has been out in force the last 6 weeks. Excuse me.
It feels like 6 months, doesn't it?
I got a concussion on Tuesday, and so if I seem a little off, that's why. So if I'm mixing up words, I apologize. But they've been out the last 6 weeks working hard to talk to a variety of different kinds of people who are impacted by the preschool promise legislation to hear what they think, and Carol and Lillian have some really good info for you. I really just have 3 things for you. The first thing, I wanted to check and see if anyone on the council has any questions about the conflict of interest information that Alyssa sent out in regards to the vote that you'll take later today on the RFP for Preschool Promise. Want to just make sure that folks read that, and then it's also in your binders. And if you have any questions at all about whether you need to declare an actual conflict or just declare a perceived conflict, let us know. And if you just declare a perceived conflict, all you're really doing is noticing that on the record. It doesn't prevent you from being able to discuss and vote on the criteria for the RFP. The second item is, I'm going to pass this yellow folder around. Alyssa's really working to try to come up with a format for the 2-day meetings that we'll do every other month, where we get you out into communities that will work for you. And so she's come up with a couple of different ways that those meetings could be structured, and we want to know which option the majority of you prefer. So I'll start passing that on the left to Eva, and then just fill that out, and I'll get it to Alyssa at the end of the meeting. And then the final thing that I just wanted to get on your radar, I emailed you about this as well, but I know sometimes things get lost in the long emails that I send sometimes. On December 8th and 9th, the Early Learning Division staff are coming together for 2 days of training that we do twice a year. And one thing that I've been hearing from my staff is that they really want to get to know you guys better. They want to know the policy body that directs their work. They want to understand your vision, your past experience, what you want to see us doing. And so on the 8th from 1 to 2, Pam and Lindsay Capps, our policy advisor, are coming to do kind of a panel discussion with staff, and I want to extend that invitation to any other members of the council that would like to come. So if that sounds interesting to you and you think you might be free, we'll be in Salem. So you have to be able to be in Salem from 1 to 2 on December 8th, but we'd love to have you, and staff are really curious about you and really dedicated to implementing the governor's vision and the council's vision, and I think they're just really seeking to get to know you more as people. So let me know if that sounds interesting, and I'll follow up with some details. And that's all I have for you.
Great. Questions or comments, feedback for Megan? Okay, great, thanks. So with that, let's get into the meat of our agenda again. So can we have Lillian and Carol join us? And while they're doing that, just a reminder, council, this is the point where we're going to turn our collective listening ear to what our communities are telling us about mixed delivery preschool. We'll have some conversation about some of the issues that have been raised, and hopefully that conversation will help to shape then the future direction of information that will come our way. But this is not the decision part. This is the conversation part. So.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Carol Collymore, Public Affairs Director at the Early Learning Division.
Hi, my name is Lillian Green, Equity Director at the Early Learning Division.
And we have some results on the community engagement around mixed delivery preschool, aka Preschool Promise. It's been quite a journey. We've had over 11 engagements, probably closer to 15, with an end goal of 20. By mid-December, we've met with a various amount of people, close to 200. By the end of this, we'll probably meet with about 300 folks who've had really great insight on Preschool Promise. So we've created a PowerPoint, my very first PowerPoint, I have to say.
Welcome to state government.
Thank you. But I don't know how to use the clicker, so Lillian is our.
I'm clicking away.
And there's just so you know, there's
One behind.
There's
Okay.
2 screens.
Okay,
Yep.
wonderful. Okay, slide 2, please. Okay, so how we did it. We, as an organization that is responsible to the citizens of Oregon, or non-citizens of Oregon, people who live in our state, we feel responsible for seeking input from the community so that we are reflecting what they want and in the policies that we make. And Preschool Promise is a unique opportunity for early learning to meet with people at the beginning, not after we've decided something, not after we've rolled out a program to try to fix it later, but to really get that input while we're building the rules so that folks can see their input in what we decide to put out. And as we've shared with the folks that are in our community engagements, we are not the experts on what preschool should look like. They are. They are the teachers, they are the parents, they are the administrators, they are the community-based organizations that really run the system. So we've really been able to emphasize that. So these are our target audiences: community-based organizations, families, Native American tribes, K through 12 educators and administrators, childcare providers, early learning hubs, and Oregon pre-K programs. We also are focused on communities of color, African American community, Latino community, Asian community, and immigrant and refugee communities. The topics, as you can see above, that we've covered are the role of the hubs, culturally responsive teaching, engagement and enrollment, wraparound services, the BA requirement, assessments, and continuous improvement approaches. And these are the dates. Oh, wait, go back one. Oh, we did that. Okay, go for it. Sorry. I'm learning this PowerPoint business. Okay. So these are the dates that we have had and the dates that are yet to come. One that is missing, actually it's on there, the one that I'm going to this afternoon for David Douglas School District. And we just had one for Clackamas that's for the 2nd. And we've got some upcoming with members of our Chinese community and a second engagement with the African American community. So as you can see, we have had several engagements. Eva ran one for me as well, which was really wonderful and insightful. Kali and Charles did as well. It's just really been a great effort. And our hub facilitators that work for ELD are also running their own engagements with their own regional hubs. Next slide. Okay. So the role of the hubs was a pretty big deal for us, as they're the ones who are getting the money to give out for the engagements. And so this was some of the information that we got, how hubs can interact. There was real consensus around home visit with the whole family, language immersion, and parent and parental participation in the hubs themselves. Advice for the hubs was please listen and be transparent, ensure community voices are represented. There was a strong theme around some of the hubs don't look like the people that go to the meetings or attend or who potentially would be seeking funding. And so that's something that came up. And then, of course, the barriers to accessing service. Transportation, you will see that over and over and over again. Transportation is a huge barrier for folks and for their kids. And then internal politics that may rise up in the hubs that prevent other, yes, ma'am.
Carol, when you say the hubs don't look like the audiences, are you talking about the people who are paid staff or the governance body, or what? Do you know what the reference is?
I think the reference is staff. I think the reference is the folks that sit on the governing body.
Government.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And then the ways for hubs to let folks know how many slots are available was something that something that came up. Parents who have kids that want to go to school, they're always told that they're on a list, but they don't know how long the list is. They don't know how many slots are open. They don't, there's a lack of information, and it's clearly not purposeful, but it's not accessible. Next slide. The next part, culturally responsive teaching. It is small because there is a lot. The pieces that rose to the top were consistency in the way that we treat children. That is something that was, again, repeated all of the time. Children of color, children of immigrant parents feel like they are treated differently, from the way that things are set up in the classroom to the way that there are home visits being done and anything in between. So that was a pretty big theme. The thing that was nice about hearing it is we heard it over and over, and we've heard it across all audiences. So folks are aware that that is a problem, and hope that it is addressed through the way that we roll this out.
Can I ask a question on that? Can you explain that a little further? What the statements were and how they're feeling that? I mean, is you said the way the classroom's set up? I mean, classroom's square, so I kind of have to wrap my head around
Sure.
this.
So when you walk into a place and let's say it's a school and there's pictures of the presidents. All of the presidents are white except for one now, right? So there's posters of things and people, kids playing and all of the fun things. There's books. There's all these things in the classroom. What do they look like? Are there Asian children in those books? Are there Black children in those books? Are there Native American children in those books? How are teachers actively engaging other people's culture in their classroom? So that's what they meant by what does the classroom look like when they walk in.
And they're saying that it's not,
There is many occasions, there are more occasions than not where that classroom is not reflective.
okay.
And that is important for folks. And I actually have, if you can just give this back to me when it's done, but this is individual feedback from each group. So there's about 11 or 12 info sheets in here. And if you feel like digging through and breaking down, you can. Something that we heard at the immigrant and refugee meeting was that it's not even necessarily the woman who was speaking was Russian. It's not necessarily that she wants someone who is Russian there, but someone who has some sort of cultural empathy for the fact that she is Russian and can make those allowances for that. For example, she was saying that up until a certain age, kids don't feed themselves. It's just the way they do it at home, and yet a child will go into the classroom and get scolded for not being able to feed him or herself. Who is that cultural bridge to help that understanding happen? So again, doesn't necessarily have to be a person that is Russian, but a person who has taken the time to understand that this 3-year-old isn't going to feed herself until she's 4 or 5. So those sorts of things. Which is bullet 3, which is respect and awareness that cultural norms are different. How are we making sure that our kids don't feel like the things that make them different are things that make them bad or things that get them in trouble? And so feel free to look through those. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't need to read them, all of them through, but.
Carol, I
Yes,
have a
ma'am.
process question.
Yeah.
So when I look through the list, I'm looking at the one behind, well, same thing, right?
Yeah.
So those are a list of challenges and how people are experiencing them. Are we also asking people what would, using the Russian lady, like what would it look like to have that bridge? How would she best receive having the bridge? Are we asking people
Absolutely.
for strategies
absolutely.
as well?
And when we do a bigger, the ending package, we'll share some of those too. Yeah, and much like she said, it doesn't have to be me. It just has to be someone. So who are we hiring, or whose schools are we picking that have cultural empathy? For her, that was the answer.
Yeah, because as I think about this group and I think about what we might do, we might, with best intentions, put something out there and just not understanding, not hit the mark, right?
Right.
So I'm hoping that we're asking for specific strategies and ideas as
And I would
well.
say that was a strong thread throughout all of our community engagement, where it was like flipping it on the head, and what would this look like?
Yeah, okay,
Like, what would
great.
we do? So again, like when we get to we had like literally poster
Oh, great,
sheets
okay.
of feedbacks around that as well.
Question was
Thank you. Please, we have Tim and then we have Eva.
I was just going to ask you, I read through these earlier. It seems like there could be some tension between like bullet point 1 and bullet point 3. And I'm just curious if there was a discussion on how you consistently treat everybody the same, but yet treat people, sort of the norms are different. I don't know how you explain or work on that in a way that makes everybody happy.
Well, I mean, I think when we're saying consistently treat everyone the same, when we're treating someone, when we're interacting with someone, we're considering all those things that make them who they are, and we're making sure that we're making allowances to support how they show up, how they're engaging, and if we're making that allowance for certain students, certain parents, then we need to make those allowances for other parents. So again, the execution of that may look different, but we are taking into consideration like how they're showing up, what language are they bringing to the classroom, who they are, and what's their cultural background, ethnic background, how are their communities set up, and engaging with them. So again, the treating.
I understand that as some of the lower bullet points, but the first one, I think you'd have to be really careful as you were treating people to their norm, people not be offended because they don't think you're treating them consistent with what everybody else is. I think that's just a delicate balance. I think it's just one of those things we have to be aware of.
Well, and I think a key word that you said that's actually not on here was treat all kids the same.
I didn't say the word same. Somebody did, though.
It's just consistency. It's consistency
yeah.
in the way that we treat all children, and I think there's probably a level of treatment that these parents reflected, which is, I think there's that feeling of just be nice to our kid. And I think that's the sort
might
of
should be
heart
the
of it,
first bullet
right?
point, yeah.
So,
I think it's like
Eva, and then we're going to let you go on to your other slides, because you have lots here to share with us.
My question's kind of similar to Commissioner Freeman, sorry, in that because I immediately thought, okay, there are consistent expectations that providers may have for children, and they of course work with the children to, get them to a certain point and talk to the parents about, hey, child needs this support or that support. I'm wondering, like specifically in this instance, where in an in-home setting, in a group setting in general, how does that work if your staffing level is that by age 2, the children are able to at least feed themselves at some level, with assistance, but then you have to have. Are we asking that then parents or other volunteers come in during times when they're feeding children? I'm just asking, like, what did, and I know this is details, but I don't want to be insensitive.
right. Well, I think one of the things that has come up also across almost every engagement was the importance of home visits and the importance of being engaged with other people's cultural norms that are outside of the classroom.
Yeah.
So if you are spending some time with the family, as much time as you can, and again, realizing that is not, time is a precious resource, but if there is a teacher in a school that's making the effort to be immersed in another person's culture, it won't be so hard when things like that come up. And that's what these folks I heard kept saying, like, and in your engagement, I thought was really interesting, one of your providers said, I make an effort to go to a birthday party if I'm invited, or I make an effort to go to dinner if I'm invited, so that they're in their environment and can see how those families or cultures work. I think that's, home visits was one of the answers, was please come see us in our home, please come see us at an event, please come, get that space.
All right, let's let you move on.
Okay.
We have lots of questions, I'm sure, so.
Okay. So for engagement, and this is kind of plays into some of the answers. We asked around how would you want to be engaged as a parent to help you and your child be more successful. So sharing education tools with the parents that they can use at home. Consider the parents partners. So do you need volunteers in class? If you're having some culturally specific programming event, something, are you using those parents? Are you connecting with those parents? Again, home visits. How is the home? What kind of experience are they having? Relationship building with someone who can reflect their culture or have cultural empathy. Again, diversity keeps coming up in every pocket of this, no matter what the subject is. So who's in the classroom? At the immigrant and refugee engagement, they said, sometimes it's just the cleaning person or the person who's at the desk. It doesn't always have to be a teacher, but someone that a child can relate with, that they get to see every day. Class volunteers, regular check-ins, diversity as a value would make a parent feel successful, and add a focus to teen parents. So how are we reaching out to teenagers who might need extra support and care?
Martha.
I have a question. So you keep mentioning home visits. So what type of home visit is it that they would like or that they want? Is that something similar to what Head Start has, that there's a 1 or 2 time shot per year that they go in and meet with the family? Or is it something more in-depth as in home visiting services?
I don't know that I can prescribe that for them. It's just something that we kept hearing, like, come see us in our home, have dinner with us, come to a birthday party, come to an event and see how we are. So it's less of a prescriptive, we're seeing what's happening in your home, but more of a just get to know us sort of situation.
And I think a component of that also is the invitation into entering someone's home, the invitation of like, if I, like, me personally, if I invite someone's home into my home, I respect them enough and trust them enough to interact with my family and my friends, and that comes with the building of a relationship. So again, what's the supports are we providing outside of that home visiting atmosphere in order for us to be invited as guests into homes and to family events and things of that nature, so we can get that in-depth knowledge of the families in which we're working with.
Next slide. Okay, so for enrollment, how would we attract folks to want to enroll in something like Preschool Promise? So again, diversity rises to the top of everybody's list. Someone in class who speaks the language or reflects the culture of the child. Something that was interesting that I hadn't considered is coordinating with Head Start, so no, quote, stealing kids. Efforts around determining who the neediest of the clients are to prioritize them. That was also, I heard in a few different engagements. No requirement for toilet training or behavioral competency. And recruit children through community partners and have after hours availability.
When we talk about the role of the hubs, this will come up. You hear this locally that Head Start takes children from healthy families, telling them we can give you this much more, so you're better off to come to us. And it's kind of like, with all the underserved kids, why are you filling your slots with children who are already getting services? So it feels like there is a really needed hub role of getting people to think about all children getting touched instead of filling my program as fast as I can. Now, I know there are forces like, their own performance that are at stake, but it seems like we need somebody bigger than the programs, and it seems to me, hub people don't, but it just feels like hubs are the ones who could do it, of getting people to quit thinking of children as meeting their performance, instead thinking about children and all the underserved kids. I get so sad when I hear these stories of people going into other people's programs and talking them into changing. It's like, why would you do that? And apparently it's common in our state. So anyway, when we get to roles of hubs, that issue of stealing kids or whatever, more positively, it's be sure we're reaching out to the underserved and not looking to already served kids to fill our slots. Anyway, so I hope it comes up again, because it seems pretty pressing. So I'll make a note for role of the hubs.
And I will also make a note to share with our hub facilitators who have a lot of engagements coming up with their hub governance committees to tease that out a little bit.
Eva?
Bobby, thank you. Also, it's for childcare and for families that receive employment-related daycare, that where Head Starts take ERDC, they will sometimes tell a family, well, you don't have to have a copay here, because it's a contracted slot. So a family who's struggling to make ends meet, they may have had a provider for years and years and years, but then say, for their older child, but then say, oh, I don't have to have a copay, I'll send my child to Head Start, but come to find out their hours don't match Head Start, so then they still end up paying for, the beginning of the daycare or end of the daycare, so I don't know what we can do with rules to help with, families in those situations.
Thanks. Lynn, and then did you have your hand up? Okay.
Good morning.
I appreciated your report and enjoyed reading it. I just have a question about the potty training question.
She would be the one.
I know, but so here's the thing. When my child was in daycare, there were potty training requirements, but there also was support at the daycare for potty training. And one of the challenges we face now from a health standard actually is potty training, because there's a sanitary issue, there's a cleanliness issue, there's a disposal of potty paraphernalia. So I,
I've never heard a diaper
so
called
I just
that.
want, my question is, what is the best practice? And I know that it's been years since I had diapers for children in my home. So I just want to know what the current evidence is and best practice, because it seems to be we're kind of pulling some of the stuff apart, and that may be good if that's psychologically good for the kid. I'm down with that. But I also think we need to be aware of we need to have a holistic approach to this very critical question.
Right.
Sorry.
And I would answer that a couple ways. One, by saying this is strictly information gathering. This is definitely not rulemaking. So this is just an effort to present what feedback we've gotten. And again, Martha's got the folder with the specific, and she'll pass it around. But this is just an aggregate of information, and I pulled out the stuff that sort of rose to the top.
Okay.
So,
because I just want us to, as we evolve here, I want to factor in. I do want to factor in the public health considerations, and because we can't ignore we ignore those at our peril. So wonderful.
and the wonderful
It's
Gwen
all too
Baxter
early in
is
the
here,
morning
so
for this.
I know she's furiously listening to those things.
Okay.
So, okay.
Thank you.
Can I just, a point of clarification, Carol, at the end, after we get through all 20 of the engagement sessions, you guys are putting together, the reason we didn't give the in-depth report yet is that it'll be packaged really nicely with all the really in-depth information for you. And then you guys will use that to debate policy questions and make rules.
Great. Thanks.
Can I make just a quick comment? So, quick comment on the stealing of the kids thing. Make sure whatever we do, we allow that solution to be flexible for communities. So in Douglas County, we're gonna have all those programs with one agency. So there'd be no stealing amongst themselves. So I would hate to say, okay, the hub's gonna be doing this when we already have a solution. So that's all I would encourage you, that we allow each community to figure that out. I think it's an important issue, and we've of course seen that when I was in the legislature, that sort of competition for kids. So just be aware there is some solutions being worked on.
And then I highlighted one at the bottom, which is a problem, again, came up across communities, was the children who fall into the limbo space. Everybody was very concerned about that between Head Start and then where our program starts. So just a highlight of that one. Okay. Wraparound services. This one, of course, created a lot of conversation. You can see the list. Big one was medical and dental services. Housing and homelessness support. How are we going to take care of kids when they don't have even a place to live, or they're,
Were there certain parts where housing came up more? Certain places, certain conversations?
with the teachers and with community folks. Those were the biggest, the two groups that seemed to be the most concerned, because they're obviously dealing with it head on. And they were including, the teachers especially were including parents in that. So how do we support parents with mental health services, medical services, dental services, immigration support? That was a big one, and food security, which obviously all of those tie together. So those were the wraparound services they would like to see if we were able to create those for them. And also, I should mention the full day care for the kids and other kids in the family. So if there are older kids who are in elementary school who also need care, is there a care space for them when they're out of school, out of the regular day? Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes.
It's worth noting, there are a lot of the home-based care that I know of does do care for elementary age children. And I don't know if you've done one just with home care providers, certified home care. Okay, yeah, I feel like typical, at least the ones that I know of.
Yeah, it's coming.
So, I don't know. I don't know about Head Start and others, but.
But that was a concern that was raised, is if we do this, will there be?
Oh, if we do them, okay.
Yeah, would there be that option?
And I think also the consideration of, we're thinking from, kind of maybe 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. However, we know that our families that are seeking care, 6 p.m., if you work the swing shift or the graveyard shift, you still have children. They need support and care. So what's the, how are we thinking differently around those time frames where we know our parents need services for their children as well?
That brings up, in my mind, blended funding, which I don't know, I don't remember in reading that. I mean, that's probably too egghead a conversation to come up with this. but it is one we should, I think, be worrying about. So for instance, a parent may be eligible for ERDC because of work hours that are erratic, unscheduled, odd hour, all those kinds of things. And the challenge with that program is always that dual role of meeting employment needs at the same time, and so the hours of care need to match the hours of employment. We don't have that constraint with Preschool Promise, and so I don't know, it may be, but anyway, I think if we could think creatively on how to teach people to blend funding. So a child could get Preschool Promise during the day to meet those needs and could get ERDC for the parents' work hours that don't match. And that way Preschool Promise can reach the population. Very unlikely you could ever fill a program that met, a group program that met those hours. They are all over the map. So I don't know. I don't think it really, I'll just make a note. I think we should be thinking, but it hasn't come up, has it? I didn't see it.
No.
It's way too egg.
I wouldn't say that it didn't come up specifically like that. There are definitely conversations around how do we match all of the things that kids need at once in one place,
So
sort of
that
like
is
a
kind of
warehouse.
blended funding.
Yeah, like, if and I, to speak to the previous slide, if we've got a kid in Preschool Promise and they need food support, how do we get them to that place? So there was some talk, and I keep referring to the immigrant and refugee one because that was the first one I went to, so it sticks in my mind the most. But maybe having a social worker or some other sort of caseworker that helps parents navigate. I'm homeless. I'm hungry. I need medical. Do we need navigators? Just as a consideration to address just what you're talking about. Did you?
Oh, I was just gonna say, the providers have also asked, like, how does Preschool Promise work for us when we have a 24/7 operation, when we have mixed, like a mixed age group, that has been something they're like, how does this work? Do we do curriculum in the evening for evening kids? Do we do, this has been all kinds of conversations around that. And so I think, what does it look like is a good question. And then they also, like, if they're not a provider that is the 4 or 5 star, do they then end up doing wraparound care while the child gets sent to a preschool? And then they're concerned about how does that impact their ability to do a business, because if they're only doing care between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. or 2 p.m. and 6 p.m., that doesn't, for staffing, for all kinds of reasons, it becomes really difficult. So how do we meet the needs of, or get them the support that they need to get to the level to become a Preschool Promise deliverer? There's a lot to consider in that too.
Eva's group had a lot of very specific questions to home care because they were home care providers and had it kept me up thinking about all of the things that they asked because I don't know how we answer them. So I appreciate that from them. That was really great. Okay, so let's move on to the very, very hard one, which is the BA requirement. It was a range of this is a great requirement to this is the worst requirement we've ever heard. Great requirement because obviously folks felt like their kids deserved the best of the best, but does the best of the best always require a BA? So we'll just start. There's two pages of, you guys don't have the second page because I updated it yesterday, but many limitations on teachers to be able to finish this requirement. It's also a QRIS barrier. So obviously the time and money factor is huge. Folks mentioned things from, I already have a BA, but it's in science, so why would I go back and get another one? I'm still paying my student loans. Why would I accrue more debt? I'm already very, very good at this, and I'm taking other trainings. Obviously, availability, rural communities, how am I going to get to a place where I can even start to do this work? Babysitting. Some of our folks are single providers or just a couple people in a center or home. Who's going to watch the kids we have and who's going to watch my own children? Lack of incentives. What's the incentive except for a job well done? And preschool teaching is already a salary restricted position. So what is the incentive for continuing? And then next slide. And then how do we capture, because there is the capture issue, how do we capture the value of community-based experience and years of experience for folks who don't have a BA, but they have a highly rated daycare or preschool program, and maybe they've been doing it 15 years and they're amazing and they've have 4 QRIS stars, or the new rating system I heard of, which you're an 8, 9, or 10, which I learned about at
it's the
EVA's.
registry.
The registry, where you're an 8, 9, or 10, but you don't have a degree and you don't want one because you feel like you're at a really great place. Again, if the provider has a degree and it's not in education, are we setting up false barriers and calling it quality? Because does quality come in a 20-year, highly experienced teacher who just doesn't happen to have a BA? Again, are we excluding teachers and providers who have experience, ratings, but don't want to go back to school? And can we do this based on evaluate the outcomes for kids versus the BA requirement? So again, just reporting back.
So I had 2 things that are not directly related to each other. One is, I don't know if this is what providers have been told and it's not exactly the case, or if it's something that we need to help them with, but it is their understanding that for certified providers, if you're certified for 12, you have to spend 50% of your licensed hours in your home. And then for certified of up to 16, that would go up to 75%. So that's 126 hours of 168 that you're required to be in your program or at your home. So that would be another barrier of, because when they're outside of their home, they're doing errands, they're doing other things that might be business related, and they need time for their families too. So I don't know if that is something that is a misinformation or if it's true, and if that's true, we should do something if we're, putting education, not requirements, but, that would be helpful to.
We can get that clarified.
Yeah. The second thing is, we had a big discussion about this yesterday at the ad hoc committee, was around the educational opportunities for people who speak other languages. The registry does really well for English speakers. Spanish speaking is the second highest, but there's still not enough trainings to get them to a 4 or 5 star. And that's the second best. So then Russian and Vietnamese and Chinese, there aren't enough trainings in beyond a set 1 is what they're called. So there are various steps within the set 1, and then there's set 2 and set 3. So I think that and we'll get to this in the RFA thing too, but if we were able to make significant investments in providing educational opportunities for providers, that would be fantastic.
Great. Kali.
So I also want to add that what came up around the question of are we setting up false barriers and calling it quality was the fact that the degree does not predict outcomes for children. So there is not a correlation between children doing really well because people have BAs. And this is true both in early childhood and K-12. And so that statement was made, and then it was followed by, so given that, are we setting up false barriers and calling it quality? And so I just think that's an important point to share. And I think I also have, I have the question of what does that mean? What does the BA requirement mean for us as an early learning council and what we have to do with mixed delivery preschool? I know that there was, that it's part of the legislation. I'm not clear on practically speaking, what that means for what we're expecting of folks, what we have to include and not. So I would love clarity on sort of what are our limitations as a council in this area and what we can do given the concerns.
Yeah, we can do that increasingly as we move toward rule. I think what's important for the council to know, at least at this point, is that there are a variety of requirements in the statute for what we're now calling the preschool promise, and the BA requirement is one of them. In some of the other requirements, the statute allows for the council to set up rules for a waiver. It does not allow that for the BA requirement. Oh, it does?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, thank you, it does, okay, my mistake. So,
But it
yeah,
says
I'm
you
sorry.
have to be working
to be
towards.
on
You
a
have to be
plan.
on a path toward it, that's right,
So
I'm
that
sorry, thank
is
you.
kind of a-
And you guys will have to decide what that.
So we, all of that's yet to come, Khalid, in terms of how we define that and what that means and what are the kind of accountability structures or not, and, you know, all of those are questions that we're gonna have to answer going forward. So that's part, council members, of why we want to get snippets of input as we go along, so that it just isn't, we can be thinking about this and cogitating, so it doesn't hit us all at the same time. So I think maybe Megan has a clarification, and then Bobby.
I actually was going to put Bobby on the
Oh,
spot
all right.
and ask her to comment, because
Bob-omb.
we were emailing about this yesterday, and Bobby shared some thoughts with me that were just a really thoughtful reflection on education and training for providers and what it can mean for kids, and the evidence that is or isn't there around BA. And I asked her, like, will you share this at the meeting? Because it was a provocative way of thinking about it. So I was just putting Bobby on the spot.
Well, I don't know the K-12 literature. I just, the literature but that I do know the literature for early learning environments and the effect of education and training on it. So I see it as very nuanced and gray. There is abundant evidence that more education is associated with greater warmth, more responsiveness, less harsh treatment of children, more child-centered beliefs versus authoritarian. There's also evidence that children, that more education is related to positive child outcomes in many developmental spheres. What there isn't evidence of is where the threshold is. There's no question that education makes a big difference in what happens to children. What we have not been able to establish is where is the threshold. And the evidence for the BA is challenging on many fronts, but we certainly don't have evidence that the BA is the threshold. We just don't know where the threshold is. But I think we need to be very careful in reporting that literature, because it isn't black and white literature. It's gray, and there are some things that are very clear. Education matters. I think what we don't want to be communicating is that education doesn't matter, because we are very clear that education matters. It's the threshold that is unclear. And so I just think if we can be careful about how we talk about it, it's helpful.
Great. I have Khalid and then Eva.
So I want to say I was very specific around the BA is not a predictor, because I do know that education matters. I'm very familiar with the early childhood research as well. And education and training are two different things, and then a BA requirement are two very different things. And one of the things that I know our session talked about was looking at models like apprenticeship programs, things that there is ongoing training and sort of development of educators that's not about getting a degree. And so you're right, the threshold, there is nothing that says the threshold is the BA. In the same way that a master's is the same, I would say, in the K-12 system.
And it's true in the K-12 also.
Yeah, but the master's
There's
degree is
evidence,
not a
isn't
determinant
there?
either, because you need a master's as a K-12 educator. But that education and professional development are important. So I just want to be very clear that when I was saying BA, it really is the bachelor's degree and not the fact that professional development is not helpful. Another thing is, too, all of what you said is true. There is a paucity of research around what is good for kids of color specifically in terms of what good teaching and learning looks like in education that supports outcomes for children of color. There's not enough research that tells us what works well. We know that there is disparities in outcomes. So what creates those disparities, what are the right training programs and educational environments that help that? And one of the things that they talked about was we do have some promising practices currently in our state for different groups. How do we look at being creative and using them as ways to train professionals in the field if they have good outcomes and they have a track record of working with these different groups? So I just wanted to put that.
You're pointing out the threshold question as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I wasn't specific about that earlier on, so I wanted to make a point to, to
great.
put that on the record.
Okay, thank you. So I have Eva and then Martha in the queue.
So mine is a question that might not be able to be answered immediately, but it is at least my understanding, and I don't know, maybe it's from providers or other, somehow I've learned this and I don't know, but like there's a certain threshold on the registry that is equivalent to a BA. I'm getting head nods, yes.
Step
okay.
10.
Okay. Step 10. So step 10 are we, is this something that could be, considered?
You're raising a potential solution, and that's part of the clarification I think that we need to get, and we will prior to making a decision.
Right.
About the in the definition. Okay, great. Martha?
Well, I think the educational issue is going to come up more and more and more. In fact, when Kate and I do our presentation, you'll see a piece of that. And I'm not in the camp that says we shouldn't have the BAs. I actually feel that education is important and critical. The right and correct education, as Bobby points out, is critical, and that there are a lot of gray areas. But by saying that the BA shouldn't exist, I think we need to raise our standards, and that's where the legislation is coming in on a BA degree. I don't think that we have, per se, a lot of options to say we're not going to do that. Are there waivers? Can we get around it? Can we give them a stepped or a laddered progression to get to a BA? I think we can. I think we need to look at our present Head Start OPK system, which requires that the lead teacher have a BA. By saying that, and this is my estimation, by saying that our pre-K promise is not going to hit those same standards, is going to put that program at a disadvantage. So I think we have to maintain standards for pre-K. And will we lose some providers? Probably. Is that a bad thing? In some cases, probably. But I think that we need to wrap our heads around the fact that even if there isn't the research and a lot of the documentation, it will be coming as these programs expand into a universal pre-K system. So I'm supportive of the BA. Are there ways that we can string this out? Are there ways that we can get people assistance and help to get them there? I think there are. It'll take time. I agree that having a BA is not necessarily an indicator of quality, but it is an indicator of a commitment by the person that's going to provide the service.
All right. I'm sorry, Charles, did you want to get in?
I would struggle with that, sort of articulating that, because, so truthfully, as I'm listening to the conversation, I'm thinking about K-12 and sort of all the educational requirements for teachers, and all the data sort of says that we're failing quite a bit of kids. And so I think we do want to set standards and we do want to clearly articulate them, but I think we should be extremely careful in drawing certain correlations.
Can I respond?
Yes, and then we're going to move on because I know we have a few more slides and we're getting close to the end of our time on this. It's a really important conversation.
I would not want to say that K-12 is the same as 0 to 5. They're two different areas. But to say that people who are not persistent enough to get a degree are not good teachers, there are a lot of things going on in K-12 that it's not necessarily all the teachers. It's the system. And is it the system that has to change?
Can we ask you to move on to some of the other slides, because you have more that will raise more questions, right?
Boy, this is gonna be good.
There's a lot of BA, and I would just reiterate again that the thread that runs through this is equity and diversity, and equity means access, and so folks are having a hard time with access to the extra educational opportunities. So the suggestions for a BA requirement is loan forgiveness of after a certain amount of years, the way they do with some K through 12 programs, to let folks, if this is the only way, is there a path for them to be able to go to school in a way that they can afford? Web-based opportunities, so for folks who can't leave their homes, for folks that need babysitting and can't go anywhere, can we do web-based opportunities? Can we provide scholarships for training for folks to do some professional development? And can we make that technology accessible for those who need it? Because again, issues of equity, not everybody has access to that technology. And then the related experience question. What BAs will be allowed as related experience? And there were so many suggestions that I wasn't going to put them all on a slide, but social work came up a lot, research came up a lot, lots of degrees relate. Some folks at the Immigrant Refugee community asked, can teachers have international degrees? Because as we know, as people are refugees, they are maybe doctors or lawyers or something fabulous in their own country, and they get here and they're running a parking garage, or they're doing something that doesn't match their qualifications. So can teachers have international degrees? Next slide. So recurring themes, home visits, and it's important for cultural connections. Again, transportation, huge, access to services, cultural awareness, supporting and being involved with the entire family, food security, health screenings, helping break language barriers, and support for the BA requirement and help in getting there. Again, BA requirements. And some of these questions are from Eva's session. So can preschool work with a child care center that operates on odd hours? Can you have full day preschool and childcare in the same place? How would that work? Can mixed delivery work in a full center that has infants up to 4-year-olds? Are multiple ages allowed in the mixed delivery space? What are the expectations around weather days or in-service days? And why can't the QRS 3 level be eligible? Are we moving the bar on that? Next slide. And then questions. Because we all waited for that line.
You haven't had enough, right? You want more?
more.
All right.
So on the QRS 3 question, it really, I remember when QRS was being rolled out, AFSCME hosted an informational session with the Multnomah County CCR&R, and one of the providers said, I have a file cabinet full of all the various quality programs that the state has run. What's to say if I participate in this, that this isn't going to be chucked out the window in 2 years? That was just about 2 years ago. And so now I'm hearing, wait a second, we were just told less than 2 years ago, or about 2 years ago, that if we were level 3, that was quality because or that we are proving that we are a preschool because we have a curriculum. Because for a star level 3, you have to have an approved curriculum, and it's monitored, and you have somebody come in and approve it. So why isn't a QRS level 3 included in this? What is the difference? So that's the question, and not just like, why are we getting left behind? It's, we were told that we were quality, and now we're being told we're not quality enough to provide services.
Council members, other kind of Uber reflections as you listen to this? We sort of went slide by slide, but just kind of overarching. Khalid?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm reflective of the work that we did earlier on our retreat around equity. I think it was a couple retreats ago. And yeah, comments that feel to me like we're recycling privilege. And I think there's a lot, the K-12 system is a different system, but it's a system that's been set up for a while. We have an opportunity on the Early Learning Council to set up a new system and to ignore the mistakes of a system that has been set up for a while is, I think, a huge mistake. And I'm a little disheartened by the willingness to just not think outside the box and to do things status quo. Because I don't know, I feel like it misses an opportunity to do things different and really create different outcomes for kids. And so I hope that the council can sit with everything that's been said and think about it and recognize that we do have something to learn from K-12. It is a different system. It is a very flawed system that's been around for a while, much harder to change. We're setting up something new. We have a lot of opportunity here. And I want us to embrace that and try and do things maybe in a different way.
Thank you. Other reflections, Bobby?
I think the role of the legislature in setting the criteria and the role of the council in setting policy maybe it would be helpful to me if we were clear when we're talking about not liking legislative decisions and the effect it has on council decisions, because it seems like there's one track when it's something that is been left to us to set policy on, and it's another strategy when we've got concerns maybe with what the legislature did. And so it would be helpful to me if we could be more clear. I sometimes hear people almost sounding like we'll use the waiver process to do something the legislature didn't want us to do. And it feels like the legislation is fairly clear that the waiver process is to give people time to meet what they said. So that doesn't seem like an appropriate response to if the council really thinks it should be a 3 and not a 4 or 5, or if we really think it should be a step level instead of a BA so that there are multiple ways to get to that level, or whatever it might be, it would feel constructive to me if we were there was more clarity on what we are talking about. Dissatisfaction with legislative decisions versus things that are in our control. And I don't know, it just feels like
It got mixed in.
they're getting, to me, they're getting so conflated that they become insoluble. Whereas I think they've got different, that we will take different strategies if we can be more clear with in our own struggles with which thing we're dealing with, something that's completely under our control, or something that the legislature decided that we're hearing from the public and from council members there's disagreement about.
Tim?
So I could spend months talking about my dissatisfaction with the legislature, so I'll avoid that. But I would like to comment on an interesting thing about government and government process. So only in government will we ever say, because we can't do it good enough, we won't do it at all. We can't have a bachelor's degree, we're not going to do anything. And that's what happens in rural Oregon. It happens all the time. We set these levels or these bars or this criteria that you have to meet or you do none of it. So what happens oftentimes is we don't do any of it. We've been having this talk around healthy families, right? We can't get to the bar, so we're not going to do any. And luckily, Healthy Families has decided to figure out how to navigate to that. So I hope as we have this talk around bachelor's degree and quality, and if the legislature made a very clear intent of a pathway to a bachelor's degree, let's support that and use it. But let's not say if you can't achieve this, we do nothing. Because it sounds a little bit like that when we talk about you have to have a bachelor's degree. That's just how I look at it.
So this has given us a lot of food for thought, which was exactly the point. I mean, we'll make a decision here in just a few minutes, not related to anything that we've heard yet, related to things we're got in our packet and we're going to hear next. But this is exactly the idea. There's more of these community engagements yet to come. At the end, we'll have I believe, a full briefing or an analysis by staff about what we've heard, and it sounds like maybe it would be helpful to have some staff thoughts about what are the paths through some of these, maybe glean from some of what we've heard from communities.
And also some recommendation from staff based on legislative intent, and sort of what's the legislative intent?
And could I just give
yes,
kind
please.
of a quote? So I'm really glad you guys had such a rich discussion, and you'll have another one in December on your December phone call before you have to get to decision-making points. You'll be beginning to talk about actual rules and program guidelines starting in January. So we're really trying to follow through on what you asked for at your retreat, which is time to discuss, to debate, to process before you have to make really high-stakes policy choices. The other thing I just want to notice is that the conversation that surfaced, especially around the bachelor's degree, obviously has implications for implementing this piece of legislation. And I think it also has implications for what you guys want to ask for in terms of a policy option package for the 2017 legislative session around how we actually are supporting and building up our workforce. And staff are working on some white papers for you around professional development, taking everything we're hearing from you and from community into consideration. So this conversation is germane to preschool promise, but it's also pointing out some holes in our existing system and some things that we really need to be thinking critically about for the 2017 session, which we are already having to think about.
So I actually heard us say 6 things that we agreed on. We talked about areas where we disagreed.
And we worked at that.
Let me just test this with you, council members, because staff may be able to use this as part of a framework. So kind of the primary thing I heard, it was expressed explicitly, but it was implicit in a lot of what we just talked about, which is if we start to think about these kids as all of our children, not kids in a particular program or kids in a particular community or kids in a particular culture, if we can grab some passion about all of them, they're all our kids, that's the first thing I heard us agreeing on. The second thing is this is bigger than any one program. It starts to get to Megan's point here about there are implications what we do here for other programs and other things that we run. I heard us say we wanted to take a holistic approach, and in particular, Bobby pointed out that part of that, and this is point number 4, may be looking at opportunities to blend funding around this. The 5th point I heard is the importance of setting expectations, but also the importance of supporting the workforce to have the skills necessary to have passion for all of the kids that they see, right? Not just certain kids that they relate to. And then finally, I heard us have some desire to have consistency across the programs that we have, both because, to Khalid's point, we have an opportunity to do things differently, but also as we start to move to some sort of universal pre-K, which is the path that the legislature has put us on with this. So those are the 6 points that I heard us agreeing on in the midst of the really good conversation about BAs or other places where we disagree. Am I in the ballpark? We'll come to you next. Am I in the ballpark with that, council members? Yes? Okay, so I'm going to write these down. I'm going to hand them to staff. Eva, we're going to let you have the last word, and then we need to move on to another topic.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to flag as another point that we haven't even gotten to in this conversation, and are the salary requirements and how, without significant investment from the state to provide more subsidy for families and that go to provider pay, that cost will fall on the private pay families who are already struggling to make childcare payments.
That's a huge one.
It's huge.
It's a huge one. And it's not divorced from some of these other things that we've just touched
Yeah.
on. All right, thank you very much. Thanks for the work that you've done and are going to continue to do on our behalf. We really appreciate it. Council members, just a quick process check. Do we need a break or can we go? Yes, we need a break. Okay, perfect. We're going to take, I'm going to put us in recess for 15 minutes. We'll get started sharply at a little less than 15 minutes. By the clock in the room, sharply, at 1:45. We're in recess. Thank you.
I do empathize, and I
Thank you, everyone, for finding your spot and coming back to order so quickly. Just a couple of things while we're getting back together and settled. I just want to acknowledge that both Harriet and Terry had a chance to join us since we began.
Driving
And they both had not together, right?
No, but you might have been that car behind me. You came from the Dells?
I did. I could have been there behind you.
Uh-oh.
I did not take the most direct route. It was blocked.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, the storm. All right, well, we're glad you're here, and we're extra glad that you're here safely. And just an acknowledgement, again, now with Terry in the room, that Terry has graciously agreed to chair our Equity Implementation Committee. We're super excited about that. And so just wanted to acknowledge that while Terry's here in the room. And then Commissioner Freeman asked for a point of privilege as well.
Thank you. So a lot of you know 7 weeks ago, somebody showed up on our college campus with the intent to hurt people. I've had the chance to be involved in a little bit of the community recovery, and at every meeting I like to remind everybody that only one person did something wrong. From the moment that was over, everybody has done everything right. And hundreds and thousands of people have stepped up in ways that are amazing. People around this table, a lot of you have called or texted me or communicated with me with words of support, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I want to take just a second and talk about Lynn, because she's going to hate it. So the day of the tragedy, I was on campus within just minutes. Within just maybe an hour, I got phone calls from the governor and the senators, or federal senators, and Speaker of the House. And I got a call from Lynn Saxton, and she says to me, hey, I know you're busy. I want to make sure you're safe, but I also have this resource that I know about. And she described this resource to me briefly, and I was not at a point to take notes or understand what it meant or really do much with it. Sometime later, a couple hours later, I was in a meeting and recognized what she had told me was something we needed. And I stepped up out of a meeting and called her and said, hey, get this coming. And she had a national team that she was aware of that descended on our community that made a world of difference. Her and her team and the state of Oregon and the governor have been a resource unimaginable to our community. And just want to say thank you.
So thank you. It's, that's our job, number one. And number two, the community has done it is very exciting to be in a community in Oregon and see a community respond as the community responded. And that was a privilege for me and something I'll never forget, despite the scope of the tragedy. So, and of course, it's always great to work with Tim. So.
Opinions vary there.
Well, thanks to both of you, not just for your words, but what you do for all of the communities in Oregon and for your work on this council. All right, so we now are going to move back to the same topic, but a different lens. So I'm going to ask Eva, David, and Gwen to join us at the witness table. And council members, this is an action item for you. It is the proposed, criteria. And we talked about the process, you'll recall, on the timeline at the retreat for the mixed delivery preschool, now known as the Preschool Promise. And behind tab number 2, I think? Yes, 2 in your binder. Is your action item, which is the criteria for the Preschool Promise request for assessment, request for, what's the A stand for? Applicants, thank you, goodness, sorry, to the hubs. So I'll turn it over to you, thank you. And Gwen, I don't think people have officially met you, so maybe
all right.
an introduction would be great, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Gwen Bachtel, and I have been asked to be the program coordinator for Preschool Promise. So it's been about just over a month, I think, that I've been in the position, and it's been a bit of a whirlwind. And I've learned that, I've learned a lot, but one of the things, and even just today in this meeting and yesterday in the ad hoc, it's, I come with a lot of experience in Head Start, migrant, and OPK programming, But boy, when we talk about the vision for preschool in Oregon and what we want it to be, it sort of turns, what I thought I knew upside down, and I realized that one of my biggest jobs is just to be a really good listener right now, and to be trying to funnel all that information. So it's been a little bit of overload as I process at night, but it's been a really exciting task so far. So I'm really excited to be here.
And I was going to jump in and say I just want to thank Gwen so much, because she has really jumped completely into this and has just really done such a tremendous job of helping to move forward, which is really a huge project. And I think, as you sort of saw in the earlier discussion, it really feels like an onion. Every time you answer one question, you reveal 3 or 4 more questions that need to be answered. So just really so thrilled to have Gwen leading the work on this project.
We hired her to do a different job, and then about a month into the job she was doing for us, we said, hey, actually, we really need you to do this job instead, and she just went for it.
So you're saying her life cycle is a month? So next week, Gwen.
Well, I recognize that Nikisha's actually a very good salesperson. She's got this shiny and new program over here. Aren't you attracted? Nice. But I did want to say, this is my first council meeting that I've been at, and I just really appreciate the space that you've created to have the difficult conversations, and for the community engagement team also to have those conversations out in the communities, because it is bringing us rich information around how we want to move forward with Preschool Promise. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say thank you to Gwen and David. It's been a lot. I think David is really on target with saying it's like an onion. And the conversation today, and then of course they have to manage me and all my questions and personality quirks too. So thanks, guys. I think today's conversation has been really reflective of what yesterday's ad hoc committee conversation was too, where there are still a lot of questions. I think that the memo that we've received really does give us the information that they can share with and is reflective of the discussions that we've had. I should also say that as we all heard through the discussion, it is a very difficult discussion to have, and there are still a lot of questions. I do think that as we move forward, that this is a good way to get something started. It's the beginning. It's not perfect, and I think we've heard in the legislature a lot. I'm waiting for the commissioners cringe. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, and I think we've said that here as well. So I'm asking all of you today to approve the criteria that will guide the ELD staff in writing the RFA for selecting the hubs for the first year of Preschool Promise, and that some of those funds should be, that a good number of the funds that we release should go to building capacity for providers. Without the professional development, without getting more providers access to professional development, we're not going to be able to see success in the program. So I would like to ask that we all make a little bit of a leap of faith. I've been asked to do it before on the hubs. So I am now on that side of the table, and even kind of cringing and jumping into it too. So I do believe that while this has been a difficult conversation, and that there are some things that we may need to do and look at for waivers and do maybe for legislative fixes in the future, that if we don't move forward with this now, we may not be given an opportunity to do it again. So that is why I'm asking that you approve this.
Thanks. And great, thank you. So council members, again, behind tab number 2 is the board action summary for your approval. The material behind it includes a summary in its with more depth of what Eva just talked about, and also the timeline that we put together at our retreat and the board meeting that followed the retreat can be found behind tab number 2. Council members, are there questions, comments, or discussion at this point? Yes, Khalid.
I have one question. I have a friend that's in Ontario and involved in the hub in Eastern Oregon, and she had questions about the preschool promise, and I wonder, do we have representation in any way from Eastern Oregon and what the involvement is in this committee?
Teresa Martinez
Okay.
is on the committee, and
Right.
she has even has committed her personal funds to get her to the committee. So yesterday she was there in person. The last in-person meeting she attempted to come and her flight got delayed, and so significant involvement. I've had even conversations with her outside of the committee. So
Yeah, I mean, my friend just talked about some of the different challenges they have in their community.
Oh yeah, and Teresa's raised that. I mean, yeah,
Great.
there are very few 4 or 5 star providers in that area. So what does it look like for them? I do think, and this is part of the conversation that we had yesterday, that and Bobby alluded to it in the how do we use the waivers so that it's not just a workaround for the legislation, but is true to the legislation, but also gives communities what they need. Because if we're going to have a true mixed delivery system, we have to work with hubs and providers in a way that meets their needs and gets us to the equity and inclusion that we want.
So maybe we could have David and Gwen just walk through briefly what those criteria are so that we get those into the record, and then we'll see what discussion council has.
Yes.
All right. So I think it's on the second page where we start talking about the criteria. What we were really looking at was, with all the community engagement input and then working with the ad hoc group, was what do we need to figure out? What capacity and readiness do hubs have to demonstrate to us so that you can make great decisions around which hubs can really implement this under the timelines we have. And so we were looking at questions around the demonstrated need and connection to the community. So have they, and evidence of that. So how are they connecting to the community? Do they understand the needs of the community, and how can they demonstrate that to us within the RFA process? Then we were also looking at their capacity to support the mixed delivery model. And this had a lot to do with their ability to actually have the readiness to contract with providers. And so we're looking for hubs that really have some track record of that, or can show us the capacity to do that. And within their community, that they have an array of providers that'll help us be successful in meeting our goal of that mixed array, that that we have the K-12, that we have community-based organizations, that we have Head Start to the table and child care providers and an ESD. So we're really looking for hubs that have all of those players at the table already and engaged in their hub work. And then we were also looking at the capacities to support the high-quality preschool. So, okay, so now you've demonstrated that you understand the need in your community. You demonstrate you have the providers that are available to roll this out. Now, once they're under contract, do you have the ability to ensure that it's high-quality preschool as defined? And how will do you have the capacity to either collaborate or offer that support to providers that maybe need some professional development or some quality improvement along the way that we're determined through the waiver system? So we're kind of looking at those 3 areas, and then sort of some subcategories under those. The methodology that we're using is that we'll be providing data books to the hubs that are specific to their region that they support, and that they'll have to interact with that and really tell us how are they utilizing data to sort of drive their work within their community, and how are they using data to work with targeted populations that the Early Learning Division and the bill calls out. So they'll have that to use as well in their work in their application. So I'll stop there for if there's any. Should I keep going? Okay.
Terry?
So I have a question about the data, because this has come up from the local hub that I participate in. I'm assuming that will look much like the hot spotting data that just came out from staff to local hubs around the strategic plan. Am I on the right track?
Yes.
Okay. The hotspotting data we receive does not match our community needs assessment. And so we're spending an incredible amount of work now responding to data that came out of the division that doesn't match our local needs assessment and doesn't make sense. It doesn't match what we know.
So I'll just add an amendment to that. I mean, I think what we're hoping to provide is actually a broader array of demographic data than that particular piece of data.
So I would hope there's not an expectation that hubs that are applying are going to have to prove the data that comes from the state wrong if they have local data that supports their vision.
And some of the data that we will be sharing with the hubs is some basic demographic data at the not within the sub-hub, not in the sub-hub region, but at the for the entire hub of what is the population of 3- and 4-year-olds at the 200% poverty level specified in the bill, and that kind of demographic data. But that data is meant less to, let's talk about the overall need of the community than about the particular focus that the hub is going to articulate as part of its plan.
Okay, thank you.
And also, I've been talking with ELD staff that support the hubs, and the hubs are going through a lot of work right now, getting everything in line with their strategic planning, and we did not want this RFA to be a repeat of what they've just done. So how do we kind of tag on to what they've done and ask them to go a little bit further and say, okay, now, you've done your strategic plan, you've looked at this, the data that has been provided, but what is now your vision for preschool promise in your community based on kind of your strategic plan that you've established? Does that kind of help? So it does refer back to that data, but it's really more, we're not asking them to do the same thing that they just did.
My concern is that local communities are being asked to do local needs assessments and then are being given different sets of data that they're having to respond to than their local needs assessment. And that's conflicting. And if we believe that this is, I don't know if I can say it anymore, tight loose, that it's about the community's understanding what needs to happen to reach outcomes, we need to respect the original vision of the council that local communities know what needs to be done in their local communities to provide outcomes and not spend a lot of time responding to new data that's being provided that may not meet and may not be reflective of what's actually happening locally.
And let's follow up. We can follow up on more conversation about that.
And I know I know that I put that when we built this recommendation, the committee had received a document and then we responded and added, and I know that I think I mentioned it and one other person mentioned something, so yes, that there should be a little bit of flexibility to say this is what we believe our target is and this is why.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And just on that, and also we're working on data that would be used to look at a sort of a priority ranking for different regions that would be utilized by this group when the award team makes recommendations, that you could then make sure that the selection of which hubs are awarded with final awards, that they're hitting the demographics or the regions that we would like as an early learning division and in targeted areas or strategically within the state. So that'll be data that can be used as well at that point after the competitive range process has been completed. So we'll be using that data that way, yeah.
Gwen, can you also speak to the request in here around permission to use some of the funds to help build up provider capacity in its first implementation year? So I don't want that to get overlooked. It's kind of a big thing that we're asking for permission from the council to do.
And David has asked to speak to that.
No, I was like, and I mentioned it, but I was like, I should have really gotten loud at that point.
And just to provide a little bit of a context for this piece, when the legislature in 2015 allocated dollars for Preschool Promise, although they didn't know it was going to be called Preschool Promise at the time, they basically said, and we're not going to hand you the money right now. You need to come back in the February session with more information on the implementation, and we'll release the monies in February. So we need to come back to the legislature with a report in January, talking in some more detail, a pretty high-level detail about the implementation plan and the RFA. But I think this is also a really this conversation really ties to the conversation that the council was just having earlier about your role vis-a-vis legislation that is passed, and what are the opportunities when you are hearing barriers or seeing questions to help address those. So as you talked about, there are a number of requirements in statute, including the BA requirement and other requirements. And then there is also the proviso for waivers. What the legislation is also pretty clear about is that the waivers need to be attached to a plan for how the provider will reach those standards. So one of the, in response to the feedback that we've been hearing from the community engagement and from the advisory committee, one recommendation would be to allow some of the $17 million that are allocated for Preschool Promise to be used in association with those waiver plans. So, for instance, if a provider outlines a professional development plan, that there would actually be resources available through this Preschool Promise funds to enable that plan to be implemented. So that would be, so again, this is something we would have to bring to the legislature or let them know, but if the council sees that as a strong direction to take, given the concerns that were raised earlier, we as staff then can bring a more formal proposal back in December. But I think the initial thinking is that there could be resources tied to those waiver plans that would be, then part of their contract with those providers as part of their responsibilities as part of Preschool Promise.
Are you talking, I get mixed up when we're talking about the first year and when we're talking about the implementation in, out beyond the first year. So are you suggesting that dollars be allocated for support of professional development plans in year one? Or are you saying we go back to the legislature and in future years?
In part of year one. So in professional,
okay. That's all I wanted to know.
And since we were discussing the BA requirement, that was just an example. I think there'll be other places where programs will need to make investments to reach the standards, and that would also be part of those waiver plans.
Right.
I just used that as an example since it was so much
Thank you.
part of the previous conversation.
So for me, part of all of this is that it's sort of like we're trying to improve things, but then we're at the same time saying, we know you can't quite get there, and so we're going to change it down to something that's less than what we know would be what we'd want to have in the first place, and we're on the same year. So we're starting out trying to reach something. We know that we need to reach a higher level. It's an understanding across the board. We've established what we think that needs to be, but at the same time, we're saying, okay, we know you can't get all the people to have BA requirements, right? I'm sorry, I missed the conversation. But so we're in year one, when we're going to give you money to try and get to where we want you to get, we're also going to take some of that money and set it aside to help you get this piece that you know you don't already have. At the same time, when the state is trying to recruit people who are more culturally responsive, so we already know there's a lack of resources to get the current pool of people there. So we're going to pull off money to help get this other group there, and we don't already have the resources available to do that at all. And it's all within the same year, because then the biennium comes up and the new legislature, and it's kind of, for me, I'm going like, I'm wondering actually is any place going to be able to get to what it is we think we want to do in this next year based on the lateness of rolling out the money and our trying to say, well, wait a minute, this may or may not apply. I'm trying to think that this is like that thing that you see on YouTube of the plane flying and they're trying to build it at the same time. It's just like, wow. And I'm thinking, I'm not getting on that plane. And even though I have a great audience that really needs to get there. And then my other thing is, I think that all of the above doesn't deal with the so what piece for me, which I constantly bring up with the Early Learner Council, which is it's great to have great preschool, but if you don't have, the community absolutely must have some kind of reflection of how you're going to link this up to the K-12 system, because they're only going to be in preschool for 2 or 3 years. And if the hubs and all these people don't have any linkages to the rest of the schooling, this whole pathway is lacking something. So that never seems to pop out. Community always seems to be about the people, the agencies, and all those sorts of things. So I just want to, those are the things that just kind of, for me, I just have, and this is a Harriet thing, I understand, that I always want it to be that we set our goal for the best, and then we figure out how to help people build capacity for them to build the best, but you don't lower your standards before you actually give people an opportunity to get out there and discover, is the thing that they think going to hold them back real or not? That's the problem for me, but that's just me. And I just felt I had, and I've said this in a couple of the webinars and everything else, so it's not new information. That's all I have to say today.
I was gonna say, it sounded like familiar Harriet comments.
Yes.
We all have our scripts, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I think, I would like to invite all of you to come. I'll try to set this up. Come visit in-home providers, and they do link to the community, and they do. So that's a side note, and to the K through 12 system through a number of ways. So I think that that's built into it in a way that maybe not so obvious, but it's there. The piece around why do we need to do professional development as we're also making these requirements, and are we lowering the bar? In the conversations in the ad hoc committee, providers and hubs have said, well, the people that we really need to reach aren't there yet. And if we're truly meeting the requirements of our equity lens, if we're truly meeting the requirements of increasing access to the communities that need access, that we're going to have to build more capacity there. And so that's why, sure, there might be a handful of providers that meet all of the requirements currently, but we need to be able to say, we see potential in this provider or these groups of providers that will be able to, that are providing, for all other purposes, good quality care in preschool, but they don't have the technical requirements of the BA. So what are the steps to get them there, and how do we support them through a waiver? So that I'm trying to think, what are the numbers? We have numbers for who's at 4 and 5 star statewide, and it's very, compared to the number of childcare and Head Start settings, it's a very small fraction. So if we're, to put this into place, we need to also build the capacity, put capacity building to meet those needs. So it's more of a, here we're setting this bar, we've made some waivers so that we can build up to that bar as we're doing it.
So clearly I've articulated it poorly, because I'm absolutely in agreement with you. Mm-hmm. And I would tell you, PPS may be one of those 4 or 5 star places, but we need help. And we are definitely not at the higher standard. So we too also need to be pushed up. So don't get me thinking that I'm sitting here representing a place where I think that, we've got it all locked up and we've got, give us all the money. That, because truly, we are not there. So I totally believe that. All I'm saying is it's hard for me to have a target, which I truly believe needs to be the target, begin to change, because PPS needs to hit that target, our community providers need to hit that target, and if we can't hit it, we need to know what we need to do, but we need to still know that that's the target we have to hit. And by putting waivers in, it sometimes gives us the look at, maybe I don't have to really do that. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm not trying to I'm in total agreement with having it. I'm just not in agreement with us moving it before we make the people try and hit it.
The
So-
waivers are 1 year.
Right, so
Yeah.
Harriet, I have a question for you, and then Kali is in the queue. So, the question about waivers for any of the legislative requirements is not before us today.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I've been reading too much and listening to too many conversations
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the
no
phone.
worries. It's not before us today. The question before us today is about the criteria that are in the memo that's behind tab number 2. And my question for you, and maybe you need to think on it, is whether, we had some conversation about the waiver before you came in.
Oh, okay.
And whether you, and there are several council members who are squarely where you are. We
Okay.
have a little bit of disagreement about it, but we said we're gonna just keep having this conversation. That question is not before us today. So the question I have for you is there anything in the criteria that's being proposed today that is a roadblock to what you just said, or that hamstrings it? So,
It doesn't hamstring it. It just has me with the big question, and this is what I tried to call and talk to Megan about. And it really is, I'll listen to the rest of the conversation and make sure of it. For me, the real question becomes, timeline-wise, with all the things that are not known, can we, and we only have 1 year, can we actually implement something or put forth something that's going to change things for the population we're all struggling so hard to change? That's really what I'm starting to worry a little bit about. But that's just, and it's kind of pervasive across all of it, to be honest with you, Pam. It just is, because I brought it up in all the webinars and everything else. I just worry that timeline-wise, when you roll something out in March, is that actually going to get up and running by the following year? And given that
it's crazy ambitious.
right, and I think we need to be ambitious. So don't read me wrong, but I'm just, and will our failure ultimately not be a failure of the hubs or us, but a failure to meet the needs of that population that we're trying to meet? So that's kind of where I am.
Fair question. Kali has her in the queue, and then we'll come back to staff to
Yeah, I just, one of the
finish
things
walking
you
us through
missed
this.
earlier in the conversation, and it's important because it came up in the African American sort of briefing, was the fact that the barriers that are presented by the BA. And so part of the recommendation around the waiver, I think PPS Head Start is unique in that you hire teachers. But you look at Albina Head Start, which serves the majority of African Americans in Portland, they don't, I mean, they're set up completely different, but they're also the only full-day Head Start. And so we had a really robust conversation in the sort of outreach session that was done, where it came to light just how it could be a barrier to people that are doing a really good job
Absolutely.
teaching Black kids. And so I think that the recommendation of the waiver was around how do we ensure that some of these organizations that have, and the home-based caregivers, and we had a couple there as well, that are African American and serving, how do we ensure that they have access to the
Absolutely.
resources and that we don't create a barrier? And then another thing that was mentioned was there are, in the statute, the wage element, it can't be changed. So now you've taken away sort of an incentive for folks that, and I talked about just, the privilege and who has access to higher ed and who doesn't. And so again, the waiver is addressing some of the concerns that we talked about before you came around that. And I personally talked about what was shared in the African American.
And and I'm familiar with that because I was going to meet with Ronnie this week to talk about that.
Ronnie had a lot to say.
Yeah.
All right, so back to staff. Are there other points that you want to raise then in terms of walking us through the content of this? And then we'll turn to council conversation about approval.
I was just, if it's all right, just to address maybe 2 examples that when David explained using some of the funds for building capacity, because we kind of have been focused on the bachelor's degree, but to go to what you were saying, Harriet, around kind of that connection alignment with the K-12 system, there is a part of the bill that says continuity from infant all the way through into the school-age programming. And so maybe a program doesn't have established interagency agreement or really hasn't connected yet to the K-12 system or with infants and toddlers. So how do we support, or how could we possibly use some, capacity building to maybe provide a training on how that might look or what that could be, so that provider could then establish some more formal connections and actually some type of a commitment from the school in them. Do you see? So as we're setting the bar for where we want high quality to be, there's a lot of different areas where we might need to build capacity, or around, I was thinking, culturally responsive parent engagement. It's maybe a program thinks they're doing excellent in this, but we set the bar, right? And so it's like, okay, you're doing this, but now maybe your staff might need to attend a training or something and then implement something new. And so I think when we're, asking for some of these funds to be set aside for some of that capacity building, I think that some of these things can be achieved within that year. And then, someone working on a bachelor's degree starting at a CDA, it's not going to happen in that 1 year. Do you see? But a lot of the things that we can hit the bar at, I think, might be able to be addressed within that 1 year.
It's a two-way street as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that they need to, the hubs also will need to work with the K-12 system, because we should not be sitting up there thinking, yeah, it's all on us, come our way. If we're not looking that way, we've got a problem as well, so.
Megan?
And I think to kind of build on that, while I am not allowed per procurement to tell you specific questions that we'll be asking in the RFA, one thing that we'll be looking for in successful applicants is how are they using funds that this council has already awarded, like the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund, Child Care Focus Networks. How will you leverage that you already have in your community toward addressing some of the things that you're bringing up, Harriet? So that kind of falls into the section around capacity to support a mixed delivery preschool model. To me, a community that's prepared to do this work is thinking really strategically about how they're weaving together the funding streams that they have already been given by this council that are aimed at some of the same issues, like connecting to K-12, like connecting to and supporting family child care providers, et cetera.
Council members, questions or discussion? Eva.
I was going to also say, thank you, that one of the pieces of the conversation yesterday around the RFA was what were the expectations for the hubs for, are they going to be able to state, or should they be able to state their waivers in their application, and so that, those who are scoring and awarding would know what they were looking for to meet the needs of their community ahead of time. So, and I know that that's probably one of the questions that we can't say yes or no that'll be in there, but I know that that was one of the things, like if we're truly trying to meet needs of our community, are we going to put forth our proposed waivers? And if we do, will that hurt our application, or, so there's still lots of conversations, and so yes, we are kind of putting something together. And we have to go on faith that the staff are making note of what everybody is saying is needed to be in the RFA. And I can tell you that from my brief time with Gwen, she's been very responsive to what she's heard people say, and that this, as vague as it may come across being, I'm like, yeah, this reflects what we've discussed, and I think that we will be able to have a program that is flexible enough to meet hubs and providers' needs and families' needs too.
Eva, would you like to make a motion?
Thanks. I'm actually going to make a motion. I would like to move that we approve the criteria that will give the ELD staff in writing the RFA for selecting the hubs for the first year of Preschool Promise, and that some of the funds should be allowed for building capacity of preschool providers so that they can achieve the program standards outlined in the legislation.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
By Terry. Thank you. Before we open discussion then on the motion, council members, I would like to ask, we have an ad hoc committee as opposed to a regular or advisory committee, because there are many conflicts of interest, both real and perceived, on this topic. So at this point, before we begin conversation on the motion, I'd like to call for a declaration of conflicts of interest, real or perceived, by council members. Do we have any? Eva.
I could have a perceived conflict because of the number of child care providers that I represent, and then other potential state and county employees who may be impacted.
Thank you. Tim.
So I'm going to declare a potential conflict of interest. I serve as a hub board chair.
Thank you. Others? Terry?
I would declare, I think it's perceived conflict of interest because I'm on a hub board, governance board.
Thank you. Are there others? Khalid?
Received conflict of interest because I'm ED of an organization that interacts with childcare providers, and I don't know, I guess could be a potential recipient.
Can I ask a
Thank
point of
you.
clarification?
Yes, please, Tim.
So I'm very aware of the potential and the actual conflict. I'm not sure what a perceived one is. Is that defined in statute?
I'm sorry, I used perceived for potential. I apologize. That was my error. I was equating them. Are there other declarations at this time, council members? Okay, thank you. Let's open for conversation and discussion. Then on the motion to accept the criteria before us. Any discussion on the motion?
Call for question.
Okay, great. So the question is before us on the motion to approve the criteria that's been set before us for the preschool promise. Let me ask first, are there any objections, council members? Okay, hearing none, motion is approved. Thank you very much, everybody, for your work. Harriet, had you had a chance to think on it, my question, as we're wrapping up this topic?
I have nothing but faith that we're going to move in a direction that we'll get to a place where those questions aren't as problematic. So I'm okay
And
with
we're
it.
gonna do a whole bunch of unknowns.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you very much. Council members, we have another action item on the agenda, and this one you will find behind tab number 3. And shortly, we'll have lunch delivered, so I'm just giving you that point of information. I'm going to turn this over here to Bobby in just a second, but just as a point of reminder, our Child Care and Education Committee, council members, acts as our rule committee, so just a reminder about that. And we have a new framework for how we adopt rules. Wasn't going to spend any time on that, but let me just say that it's a pretty cool thing. It's a pretty unheard of thing around the country to really have this sort of framework and a set of principles lined out for all of the rules that this body will adopt, whether that has to do with these rules or rules related to the waivers that we just talked about. So that's a very cool thing, and these rules before you are an example of rules that have gone through that kind of principle framework process. So with that, these are an action item on our agenda, and I will turn it over to Bobby.
Do you want me to?
I think you can do it from where you are,
Oh,
so you don't
okay,
have to worry
great.
about it.
So-
Unless you want to.
No, no, this is great. So the, and Kim Parker's here, this is this committee for doing rules actually works hand in glove with staff. The council is dealing with the policy conceptual level, and the staff is providing the expertise because this is a very legal process. So I must say our first round through is pretty exciting because that isn't just a theoretical partnership, it works just fine. It worked very well our first time through. So another little piece of background that I want to give, one of the principles is that we look holistically at rules, and so we have created a grid, and it's a working, it'll be continually improved, but we look at all the key components of rulemaking, like pre-service requirements for personnel, on down to specifics like ratio and group size, and we look at it now for everything we set rules on, whether it's a type of childcare such as the one you're going to look at that we do a contract with, or whether it's the rules that providers have to meet. And we're looking at this and so we can see holistically what we are doing as a state in terms of building a continuously improving child care and education system, so early learning system. So the teen parent and alcohol and drug rules are what in front of you. That is a set of contracts that the Early Learning Division administers for two very special population, teen parents who are completing their education, and they get not only childcare for their children while they're in it, but also they get parent education. So that's one audience. The other audience is a group of parents with young children who are in alcohol and drug treatment programs, and they get childcare provided while they are simultaneously getting treatment through these A&D programs. So these are these specific rules are focused on that particular program, the set of rules that guides the division in writing contracts. There was a certain urgency felt by staff in moving these rules forward because there were all kinds of discrepancies that was making it very hard to write contracts. We were still under language of who was doing what that was so antiquated. There was a lot of inconsistencies. So when you look at the side-by-side that we gave you, what you see is that the majority of changes, the revisions, are things like fixing language, not conceptual. They're important, but they really aren't the things that the council is so much concerned with. So there were some issues that arose, and I'll go through those briefly, but you can see a timeline for the input process that we went through. And even with a rather substantial input process, we did not meet our own standards on two levels. One was obtaining parent input. We just didn't have enough of it. We are recommending going forward anyway because the process we're using for Preschool Promise means that when we bring forth the proposed rules for Preschool Promise, we also will have created a list of rules that we think need to come back for revision because we found inconsistencies or not meeting the principles. So we think you're going to be seeing numbers of sets of rules after we get Preschool Promise rules through the process. We think we'll be following up with reviews of other sets of rules because we will have found in our process other areas that needed to be improvement. So these could be coming back to you within a year for other adaptations because things appear. So those two principles we were not able to fully meet to our own standards. The getting as much parent input as we wanted, or getting as much congruence across all the rules. And so for that reason, we may be coming back, but because of the urgency of improving the rules in order to be able to write contracts with these programs, the committee is recommending that the revision goes through. One issue that I think may come back to the council at some point, what is an interesting one about teen parents can get their education either through their school district or through the community colleges. And the teen parent programs are run through the high schools predominantly. And so a parent who's getting her GED through the community college may not have access to the childcare and parent education that she needs to support her because she is not enrolled. So we've written the rules to encourage dual enrollment, so that a community college, a teen parent getting her GED through the community college also be enrolled in the high school for her parent education and childcare simultaneously. What has surfaced, so that's what's written in the rule, is to encourage that. The issue is, with completion rates being such a huge issue for high schools, there are maybe very real, perceived or real barriers for the K-12 system to actually be willing to dual enroll a teen parent who is getting her GED through the high school. We think we want to monitor that and watch, but it may come back to the council as a conversation that the council should be having at a higher level. So we wanted to highlight that, and we will continue to collect information on it. But we think it's very important. The rules also contain language to reduce barriers. So for instance, we're only requiring residence in the state instead of having established residency. So the move was to reduce any barriers for these very high-risk populations to getting the services they need. And so I think I would like to take questions on what emerged for people as they looked at the revised rules. I apologize, I find reading rules really hard.
Especially on your cell phone, Bobby.
Yeah, you know, and so also, since you're gonna be getting these from us, we're giving you them because there's always the devil in the detail, and you have, you know, we want you to be able to go to whatever level you want. On the other hand, I do recognize that that's hard, so we would like feedback. We're giving you the rule, the proposed changes, and then comment to try and facilitate this. And if you have recommendations, it would be much easier if you did X, Y, Z. We're still very much in the learning stages of the council taking on this new exciting role of being serious partners in rulemaking and linking rules to policy rulemaking so it implements the council's policy, but we're learning. And so that kind of feedback is more than welcome.
Great, well, I just want to say thank you to you and the committee for taking on the deep dive on behalf of the council, because it's super important. I personally found the format really helpful. The only suggestion I have is to make sure that we, and maybe this is a staff thing, put the principles in every time.
Okay.
With the, because I'd like to have those in mind and reference as the context.
Kim will write that down.
Okay, great, thank you. Council members, other questions, comments? Tim?
Just a comment, thank you for this work. Writing rules is even more grueling than writing legislation. One thing that I think we should be conscious of as a council is that all these words will have definitions, and at some point, whether it's through contractual writing of things or interpretation, or at times, sometimes there's opportunity to do enforcement. Some staff somewhere is gonna try to read and interpret. Having a feedback loop is important, so if somebody's not sure what was meant by or how that's gonna play out, that they can contact some of the people that were actually doing the work and know the intent. So we just might think of that.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Other questions or comments or reaction, council members?
Can I ask?
Yes, please, Martha.
Excuse me as I'm eating. Bobby, you said that the rules are going to be residency versus established residency. What does that mean?
Oh, Oregon has a specific definition about how long you have to live in the state to be a resident. We've opened these rules up, so if you're residing in Oregon, it's sufficient. You may not have been here as long as is required to be a resident, but if your residency is here, these rules allow us to help.
So if I move in tomorrow and I'm here for one day and I've got an apartment, that's good.
You've got an address, you're here, that's good enough.
Okay.
Other questions? Comments, reactions? Do you have a motion?
I so move we approve the report, or the recommendation.
Is there a second?
Second.
By Martha. Council members, any further discussion about the motion, which is to approve the rules as, I'm sorry, Lynn.
The only thing I would add is I'm excited about updating the rules, and the other thing I'm excited about is accelerating the gains we're making in the state for unwanted pregnancy prevention.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Additional comments, questions, or discussion, council members? All right, we'll call the question then. Any objection to the motion, which is to approve the rules as submitted, or amendments to the rules? All right, thank you. Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you very much, Bobby and committee. Great work.
Exciting.
Very exciting. All right, council members, we're going to move now back to a discussion item. And if you're here and would like to provide public testimony to the council, now would be a good time to make sure that you are signed in so that we can come to you in just a few minutes as we move toward that. So just again, council members, as a point of context, you'll find the information behind tab number 4 in your binder. This is information only at this time. We do anticipate action item coming up in January or February, right?
February.
Probably February. Okay, great. And we are anticipating, again, as we said at the outset of this meeting, our February meeting, at least part of it being in conjunction with the Oregon Health Policy Board, who also has a foot in the home visiting world. And this comes to us as a result of the budget. We have a budget note on the ELD's budget. And we have charged our Best Beginnings Committee, which Martha chairs, to sort of be in charge of shepherding us through. And the budget note essentially is to bring back to the legislature a set of recommendations for finally in this state getting to one home visiting system with a coordinated screening tool and a coordinated approach across all the myriad home visiting programs that we have. So let me turn, this is an update and an opportunity for conversation about the budget note and about the work underway. I'll turn it over to Martha and Keisha and Kate, and we'll get started.
So first of all, I want to introduce Kate Wilcox. She's with Maternal and Child Health Section Manager. She's in Lynn's shop. And then, of course, Nikisha, who's been my left and right arm on a lot of things relating to this. It's been a joint effort, frankly, working on the budget note. And when it was assigned to Best Beginnings, it was my focus and aim to make sure that we were partnering and doing this together and not in separate silos. So we reached out to the OHA folks, Kate first, and had a conversation with them and made a plan to move forward. So that's what brings us here today as a joint presentation, which, Lynn, we're hoping to do with your folks. So this is basically what we want to show them too. Okay. So first slide that you're looking at is the Senate budget note for SB 5507. You'll see that there are, based on, and we're interested in some of how the language came about, so some of the conversation that we'll have, you'll get to those questions. But given the expanded Healthy Oregon's
Healthy Families Oregon budget, 3 bullets came out, which one was to develop a set of outcome metrics, which we've talked a lot about metrics in the early learning division and hubs and council, connected to evidence of impact for consideration by the Early Learning Council and the Oregon Health Policy Board, that any home-based service that receives state dollars must meet in order to continue to receive state funds effective July 1, 2016. The next one is to develop a plan and timeline for integrating the state's professional development system for early learning providers with the emerging professional development system for home visitors. So you'll start to see a theme. We're talking about education quite a bit today. And 3, develop a common program agnostic screening tool to identify potential parent-child risk factors and intake form for families who are eligible for home visiting service and require implementation by state-funded home visiting programs by July 1, 2016. So 2 of those 3 we have to at least give the recommendation of what the implementation is by July 1. And it says that the ELD and OHA shall report back to the legislature, and we're hoping to get that to the process where both Megan and Lynn can go in February, I think, and make that presentation. One thing I'd like to note here is that as we went through this process, our conversation early on, we did have a meeting with Kate, Benjamin, Larry, who else was at that first meeting?
Aaron Robin, you had internal ELD staff.
We'll get to some. Yeah, okay. And we reached out at that point when we had that first initial conversation to reach out also to DHS because they also have some home visiting components and programs, and we didn't want to put forth anything that was going to harm them in the process of receiving state funds as well. Okay.
All right.
So the budget note intent is to ensure that home visiting and early learning programs succeed in reaching children and families in need of services through an integrated early learning system, health transformation, and home visiting systems. Having done this home visiting advocacy for a number of years now, not only on a state level but a national level, the programs don't always work with each other. Sometimes they're at odds with each other. Sometimes we're, as the phrase was used earlier, trying to steal each other's families, which is not really the intent. With the advent of McV, Maternal Infant Early Childhood Home Visiting System, that's improved here in Oregon. We are not having, I don't think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, because we've all been doing this for a while, I don't think that Oregon's having the problems that other states are having, but we still need to work in connection and in synchronization with each other. And so the intent is, for a lack of a better phrase, how do we work in the sandbox together instead of separately in different sandbox? The budget note was developed out of conversation between the ELD and the Oregon Health Authority leadership on how best to integrate the home visiting within the early learning and the health systems. And the budget note did come out of the governor's office as a recommendation. So accomplishing the task, the Early Learning Council Best Beginnings Committee was charged, as you've heard, and then staff from the Early Learning Division and OHA have facilitated the process. And actually, I think once you see the committee members here in a minute, you'll see that we've really integrated this, not just as Best Beginnings making a decision and then Oregon Health Authority staff making recommendations. We've tried to work in conjunction with each other, and we've had a lot of players at the table, a lot of the people that are involved in this to give us what's going on in each of the arenas, in the disciplines, and to work towards what can we do jointly. The subject matter expertise included, as you can see, not only the ELD, OHA, but DHS. OSU came in We've had great conversation with them on their family and community health with technical assistance, which I'm thrilled to have, we're thrilled to have, which is 0 to 3, which is a national organization that focuses on prenatal to age 3 issues. And our staff person actually resides here in Portland, so she's been able to really be very instrumental in giving us some technical information. Next. Here's who's actually on the committee. And you can see that we have for us, Janet's been on the committee, as far as the ELC representatives with myself. We have Benjamin and Kate and Larry on from OHA. And then we have Beth Green, James Barta, I'm going to look down this and miss one, Marguerite Kanegi, who are part of the Best Beginnings Committee. And then, of course, we have, and Donalda, sorry. And then we have ELD staff, which includes Erin and Nikisha, and I'm missing somebody up there.
Lisa Panero.
Thank you, Lisa. And then from DHS, we have representatives for Jason Walling and Kim Fredlund, who are both the self-sufficiency side as well as the CAF side.
All right. So we wanted to approach this work by building on what already exists, or at least looking at what already exists. And we've now had this maternal infant early childhood home visiting program funded by HRSA, the Health Resources and Services Administration, for about 5 years now. And that systems work that has been going on is really providing a nice foundation for this. So what you see here are a couple of pieces we've been drawing on to then develop this work. So about 4 years ago, a broad cross-sectoral group developed a home visiting entry questionnaire based on the McVie program, which we can use as a platform from which to spring the agnostic screening tool. In addition, there's been a lot of work developing the draft of the home visiting core competencies with input from a lot of early childhood professionals, both at OSU, different community colleges, and the Oregon Registry Online. So we're building off of that. In addition, we just finished the piloting of the home visiting data system, which is now called Tracking Home Visiting Effectiveness in Oregon, or THEO. We've tried Coho and some other ones, but Theo seemed to grasp what we needed. And so we're pretty excited about that as the mechanism around which we can collect the data and report back on the data that's needed to track the outcomes. In addition, in terms of looking at metrics, we're just drawing on what all is out there. This Child and Family Wellbeing Measures Workgroup Final Report was a new report that we were taking a look at. We also are looking at what's happening in a couple of other states, New Mexico and Vermont, to help us frame what the outcomes where we can draw from outcomes. So our progress to date, first of all, we needed to define home visiting. So I think earlier in the discussion, home visiting gets used in a lot of different arenas. This is not the same thing as being invited into the families, which I think is kind of exciting. I want to be invited. It's also not home health, which is where you go in and actually provide clinical services in the home. This is really defined as programs that strengthen family bonds and understanding of human development to support healthy growth and development and family self-sufficiency. So that's how we're defining home visiting in this context. We needed to define our age range, so our primary population is prenatal to 5, knowing that some of the home visiting programs extend, actually the Cocoon program extends up to age 21, but the secondary population being that early grade school. We've convened 3 work sessions on each of the 3 points. So one that looked at the professional development work that's already been happening, another around metrics that are out there, both within our state and from other states, and then the third one was around the home visiting entry tool. So we'll dive a little bit into where we are in each of those 3 buckets. The outcome metrics, we've come up with 5 goals that we would like to have some metrics around that all these home visiting programs that receive state dollars would need to achieve. So We want to see improvement in maternal, infant, and family health and well-being. We want to prevent childhood accidental injury, abuse, and neglect, and reduction in crime and family violence. We want to see improvement in school readiness and achievement, improvement in family self-sufficiency and coordination of community resources, and improvement of equity across all communities. Sorry. We don't have the specific metrics defined yet, but those are the buckets around which we feel are really important to this type of home visiting and would really elevate everyone, all the programs, to supporting our families in their communities the best.
Question?
Yes.
When you say improve equity across, what does that mean?
Well, we're looking at what are our programs really providing home visiting services in a cultural and linguistically responsive way? Are we reaching our communities of color? Are we really addressing health disparities as they might exist? But really focusing an eye to calling out health equity is a really important piece of this.
Might I suggest you say that? Because that for me, that sounds different than what you just said.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, professional development, again, we wanted to look at what's already underway and build on what we've got. We also recognize that there are a lot of cross-cutting topics that are already out there for professional development that home visitors could really benefit from. For example, reflective supervision, motivational interviewing. We were looking, like I said, at the Oregon Registry Online. And we're also exploring the types of trainings. Do we want seminars online? What's going to be accessible? How do we want to achieve those standards? Do we want certificates? Do we want higher degree tracks? And exploring a ladder. I want to turn it over to Martha because the ladder was really a passion that we have.
I think it was an important piece. When we first started this was the first bullet that we dealt with, even though it was the second one, because we thought it'd be the easiest. I think it's turned out to be one of the more challenging ones because there is a lot that's being done. I think that in our assessment of what's out there, there is an awful lot that's going on. But how do we give our professionals in the home visiting field the ability to expand and do more in their own field to do a better job for our families? And we came around to the point of, and I'll use Healthy Families as an example. You come into Healthy Families, you don't have to have a particular degree in health or education or early childhood, but you come in and then the first year to 2 years, there's an awful lot of training that is required by Healthy Families Americans, so they take that. But then once you get through that level, and so that would be, if you look at a ladder, maybe the first 2 rungs or 2 steps. But what's the next step after that, and how can we raise the bar so that we can, number one, keep our professionals, and number 2, give them the education that they want? We're finding that there's really a need for that. And number 3, the personal development, and then number 4, for our families. So we are exploring a ladder of educational opportunities, which can also lead to requesting that we have a professional home visiting degree in the state. Not a requirement to do home visiting, but I feel strongly that as this profession grows, we need to give the opportunity to say, I am a professional in home visiting. Megan.
I think one thing, just to put on the record, I think that our community college system is already and then wants to be even more a partner in building out that career pathway and that career certification for home visitors. And we've got some community colleges, the one in Coos County, down in Medford, that have actually already built this out, that I think are really good for us to learn from and keep building on across the community college system.
I think that's an important thing to say. What we found in that first meeting is that, oh my God, what is out there? And we just haven't connected a lot of the dots. And Coos is one. They're actually giving certificates and
other recognizable pieces of paper to people to say, okay, you've taken this class or you've completed this track of training, which can go towards a degree. Now, how do we start to integrate that? I had a conversation with Tim a couple of months ago, and he said, my community college would be really interested in a program like that. And so how do you, the other thing that came out of the professional development piece was, and so how do you home grow those professionals? And if you've got those tracks within your community colleges all across the state, then you can home grow your own kids, your own people that are in that, and keep them in the community, or attract them to your area. I know Lynn Benton was looking at a career track as well. And then OHS, or no, not OHSU, sorry, OSU, also explored it. What has happened with McVie is that some of this started to come out and roll out. So we're real excited that, McVie's been kind of the catalyst to some of this. But then it stopped. And the question I had with the group is why? And I think we're now past some of that why into why not? Why are we not moving forward again? So by taking everybody and pulling them together in the room that day, and I have to admit to you, I thought this would be much easier than it was, that we'd have 3 meetings, bam, we'd be done. No, we've got a lot more to do. But by...
Martha.
Yeah. I go to the bottom line a lot, maybe sometimes too much, too quickly. Anyway, with the professional development piece, by having them all in the room, seeing what there is, I think that as we move the work forward in the next couple of months, we actually can come back and say, here's a plan that we might be able to move forward that can satisfy a lot of the disciplines and satisfy our needs as well as the needs of our workers. I have to tell you, I'm really excited about this piece, more so than probably any of the rest of it.
Bobby? I have 2 clarifications. Home visiting, are we, in this budget note, focused on home visiting in very specifically named home visiting programs, or are we focusing on the home visiting that happens through multiple early learning programs? Okay, so that's my first question, and kind of a related one.
And you're going to have me try to remember that. Okay, I got it.
Well, I think it's related. One of the big issues that this council has worked on is integration, which I see that shared intake as where people move from thinking about families as my families to the families we're trying to reach, whether it's through my program or other programs, and home visitors seem really central to me because they're the ones who are looking. So I see it related in the sense that if we're talking about the broad group, then this really seems like key to what we're trying to do through the hubs, in which we kind of some of the things that Terry's community has already done. So I see them as related. So the first question is, how broad is the concept of home visiting in this budget note? And secondly, how are we relating it to this council objective of trying to think families first and integration so that together we meet families' needs instead of fill my program?
Okay. Let me tackle, and with help from Kate and Nikisha as well as Megan on this. The first part of how broad as far as, and I'm assuming you're pointing to the professional, to the professional development on it. The budget note was really not that specific, and we did have that conversation within the group itself. You know, how broad, how confined should we be? We went to the broadest.
Oh, you did?
Definition of how broad can this be. However, knowing that it's the budget note, which was related to Healthy Families Oregon's funding, we tried to narrow ourselves in some of the processes so we didn't get too broad. So as far as professional
Can I add
development,
just a
yeah,
bit to that one?
sure, please.
With the budget note, it's really, it's talking about home visiting programs that receive state funding. So in terms of the confines of that, that's been our scope. But knowing that we're trying to build a home visiting system, and this is a great opportunity to launch that. And so we're keeping in mind even programs that don't receive state funding.
So are there
But
really
so, like-
only two that receive state funding? Healthy Families and Babies First?
No, there's really, DHS gets some
Oh,
too.
DHS.
Yeah.
And how
that's why we
about
brought
Oregon Head Start pre-kindergarten
Yes.
that has home
That's
visitors?
exactly
They get
right.
state funding.
And-
Are they in or
Yes,
out?
they're
Yeah,
in,
they're in.
and early intervention receives,
Right.
does some home-based work too. So there's quite a few.
So Megan, did you want to make a clarification?
No, I didn't want to clarify. Kate went exactly where I was going, which is we're trying to build a system that can work for a variety of different kinds of home visiting programs. And the ones that are under our control are ones that the state contracts with providers, the ones that the state funds. And I would just add food for thought. Right now, the funding for home visiting is really restricted to specific types of programs in statute. So Early Learning Division has $24 million for home visiting for the Healthy Families Oregon program only. And then we have about $4 million for Early Head Start only. And so it's still kind of separated in that way on the back end on the funding stream side. This is starting to put some things in place at the point of service delivery that allow us to be a little bit more integrated, even though funding streams are still statutorily siloed.
Right. And likewise, for the nurse home visiting programs, we get $1 million for State General Fund, of which we leverage, but it's mostly run through local health departments, and it's going to be linked much more closely with the CCOs. So it's the integration of really all those systems that's really kind of exciting, and home visiting is a little bit at that nexus of all of that.
Well, a follow-up is, where do the hubs fit in? Because my vision of the hubs is it's the place where people start thinking about all families instead of my families. So, and this intake process seems really like the foundational part. So I'm just wondering how this is all connecting to the hub development.
Before you do that,
You're a little bit
Charles
ahead of
has
us.
a question, and
Yeah.
then we'll let you move on.
Yeah,
So,
because
Charles.
Bobby's a little bit ahead of where we're at.
Well, that's usual.
I think this is kind of where we insert the equity piece. While I think those models, sort of family home visiting, some of the nurse partnerships, some of the stuff that's been mentioned, works, part of what I keep hearing out in the world is they don't necessarily incorporate varied cultural elements to them. And I think as we start to think about the changing demographics of our state and so on and so forth, is really how does the Early Learning Council provide capacity to various forms of home visiting. So yeah.
So,
Can I
Yeah.
add one
Go
more?
ahead.
I also want to keep reminding us that while this work is charged with the Early Learning Council, the Best Beginnings group, to facilitate, it really is engaging CCOs as much as hubs, as much as DHS, and we constantly have to keep that multi-agency hat on as much as we can.
So, you ready? Do you need to get on this one, or is it a different issue?
I think I can wait.
Okay, great. Let's let you finish your slides, and then let's, because we
We're
keep
such a
interrupting.
rowdy bunch.
I know.
It's good conversation. It's a bunch of
I do, before I go on to the entry screening tool, I do want to say, Charles, we've heard that in several areas as far as our home visiting, and staff, as well as through the RFP process, have been very focused on making sure that each one of our RFPs, as we've gone out for Healthy Families Oregon, has that lens and is looking very culturally on that. I will point to Multnomah County, and I don't do that often, as being a leader at the moment through HFO. Yeah, I don't. I mean, sometimes they drive me nuts. But they have,
Well, thank goodness no one works from Multnomah County here.
yeah, they know.
They're listening.
We do know that,
Yeah, they know that, they know me. But that they've pulled out a piece of that that is specific to Black African American, and in fact, we're running that program through Ron over at Albina Head Start. They struggled with finding the appropriate staff to run it, and so approached Ron, and Ron kind of approached them at the same time. And so we do have in Multnomah County a focus. There's what I call a pod or a hub of staff that are specifically hired for that purpose. So we are trying to address the issues and the concerns that are coming up. So is there another question with that? Okay.
I appreciate your eye on ensuring that all the home visiting programs incorporate those.
And also, it's bigger than the staffing issue. It really hints at the tools that are being used with communities and ensuring that they are culturally responsive.
Yep, the funding, the tools, the whole shebang.
Right.
Right, which is why a few of those RFPs were held back for a little while, because we asked them to address it in a more substantial way. Okay, so the third area is the entry screening tool, and you know, it was really interesting in going through this. There were a few phrases in the budget note that when we started to delve into it, and this is one of them, where we're actually going to probably come back to you, Megan, and you, Lynn, and say we want them to change that phrasing. We have worked for a long time in this state about trying to get an entry screening tool. One. And the reality of the matter is that there is not one entry screening tool. However, can we decide that there are data points, and I'm looking at the two of you because you're going to have to send this message, that are there certain required data points for all these programs that we can put and say, this is what we want our home visiting system to look like when you're talking to a mom.
Or dad.
Or dad, a parent. At that point, and then roll in to, okay, we know that these particular data points are going to hit Healthy Families Oregon, or Nurse Family Partnership, or Early Head Start, or maternal case management, whatever it is, and then start to spread those out. Instead of saying, okay, we're going to have an 80-page entry screening tool with every question possible, and then come back and decide. We also know, hang on a minute, Megan, we also know that there are communities who have already developed their own tool based on some work that was done early on, 5 years ago, through McVie and was shelved. So we've pulled that tool off the shelf. We would like to revamp that slightly for communities that have their tool already set up and going, and we'll use Yamhill as an example. They're working with their Healthy Families, their CCOs, who else out there? Public Health. And they've already come to the table, taken most of the questions that we think are the required data points, and then they sit down once a week and look at all of the applications, and they figure out jointly where that should go. We don't want to disrupt that organic process, and that goes back to your question, Bobby, on the communities and the hubs. So the hubs are at the table, the CCOs are at the table. It's really nice to watch that. But where we have communities that haven't done that, can we give them the screening data points and say, here's an example, please use it. If you're not using one now, or develop one based off of this, and we'll also bring in the technical assistance behind that to work.
So I look to the council always for policy guidance and decisions. I happen to just have some personal passion around this one. I love the Yamhill Family Core, which is what you just described. What I'm interested in is how, I think it's human nature to think that the program that you work for is the best program, and that everybody should go to your program. And sometimes that's true. It's true for some families, it's not true for others. And so what I'm looking for as the early learning system director in this screening tool, is a tool that helps guard against that human nature to think that since I run the Healthy Families program, every family just really should have that, when what maybe they need something different. And so how do we collect data points or collect information about where a family's at, and then use that information to match them to the best fit program or the best fit service without letting our ideas that our program that we're the most familiar with is the best one.
Right.
So it's just trying to kind of interrupt that natural sort of human nature to like the thing you're most familiar with, so that we can really have families at the center of how we're routing people to services. So that's really, like my personal passion behind this, and that's the intent of some of the language in the budget note. Communities that have set up systems to do that, as Yamhill has, I really admire, and I am curious how we get more communities to a place where they're able to do that.
I have Terry and Lynn in the queue. We're going to spend about 5 or 7 more minutes, and then we need to move on to other agenda items. So Terry and then Lynn.
To Megan's point, I've been involved in this work since, it's been 16 years now, but I was part of the home visiting, I wasn't the steering committee, whatever the other piece was, whatever that was. And it's been my observation that the locals are so far ahead of the state on this, that they are two very different realities. At the local, my experience at the local level is we are not competing for families. There are way more families than any of us can serve. We've been at the same table together for a very long time. It has been our state partners that have not been at the table together and have been saying, that's where the conflict has been. And when we started that work prior to the application for McVie, that's when that all started to go away at the state level. So it doesn't really need to trickle down. It kind of got pushed up in many, many, many communities. So there's just that piece. I don't think that's the reality of what's happening in communities that we're competing. None of us have enough energy, resources, whatever, to meet the need. And most communities have come up with a way to figure out where families go. That's just the reality of that.
That was one of the things, Terry, that came out in our group conversation. We knew that, which is why we're not saying we're going to develop this tool and we're going to give it to you and you're going to like it or not. Too bad, you're going to do it. It was more to come up with the data points that we need to come into a state data system like Theo to help us understand how well we're doing, who we're missing.
Well, and I'm really excited about that because at a local level, every time the Healthy Families tool changes and we try to adapt it to our local all programs tool, we get smacked. Wait, Healthy Families doesn't want you to use that tool, you're adapting again, and it takes us a very long time to get the okay to use whatever adaptation we've made again as a community to fit the change in the Healthy Families tool, which is a barrier because you got to get new paper to the provider's office because it's not happening electronically. So I'm really looking forward to that piece. I think that will be wonderful.
Well, hopefully we don't change the tool too often, it's been a long time since we did the HFO and we just did it a few months ago for the first time in a long, long time.
So we're going to need to start moving on. I'm going to go to Lynn. I've got myself in the queue. We'll give you an opportunity to wrap up, and then we'll move on to our next. So Lynn, Pam, wrap up.
So with regard to the question of coordinating across agencies, across counties, across everything, I just want to say that the consistent drive has to be in this effort to simplify. Because we are a very small state, we are not a rich state by any standard, and our ability to layer up is much greater than our ability to deliver results currently. And so the Oregon Health Authority, and there's no pride of authorship here, but we have national data to support this, in its effort to stand up metrics, has had, we're told yesterday, more success than any state in the country by keeping it simple and having one list. Everyone has to produce the one list. They can go way beyond that with everything else they're doing, that's great. But the only way that we have gotten ahead as fast and as far as we have is to keep it simple. I know a lot of our stakeholders would say, are you kidding me? But, but also to identify a common set of metrics and to be relentless about execution against those metrics. So the only reason I bring that forward is not because I work there, but because I have seen an example of something happen in Oregon in an inordinately short period of time in a small state without a lot of money. And that should be a lesson to us all.
Thank you. So mine, I have a historical note, 2 heads up, and a request. So my historical note is that my first conversation about coordinating home visiting in this state was in 1990. I hate to say how old Charles and Eva were in 1990, but I had my
diapers.
But my
Same, I was potty trained.
You should have been.
Sorry. So anyway, just to say that this is and Janet's nodding because she was involved in some of that as well. This is a long-standing set of issues in our state, and there have been many, many, many attempts, more than I can count, to try to do this. And we have gotten up to the precipice a couple times. We don't step over it. You, just in this presentation today, have said, McVie, this put on the shelf, this tool on the shelf. We do this time and time again. To Lynn's point, we layer up, we don't simplify. I'm not sure why that is, but what that tells me, now to my heads up for all of us, is that when we get to the point of the precipice again, it really does mean we have to simplify, and everybody here, and everybody's program here, and everybody's program who's on the phone or on the web is gonna have to step over it, which means you have to do it differently. So if we just say we're gonna keep the Healthy Family, I'm making it up because it's our program, but if we're gonna just keep the Healthy Families tool and we're just gonna whatever to it, that's not gonna work. We're not gonna step over the precipice. So I just wanna put out there, it's gonna get hard. This is the really easy, kind of cool part. It gets really, really hard the closer we get to the precipice, right? So, and now my request, which is that since 1990, the evidence has gotten much better, and the research has gotten much better about what it is that works here. Frankly, there are some home visiting programs and some home visiting components, including those that we have in this state, that don't work. Or they don't work for some populations, or they don't deliver certain outcomes for certain populations. We have to do a much better job of paying attention to what the evidence and the data tells us works. So my request to you is that you do that as we move forward in this conversation, so that we have maybe another tool in the toolbox that we haven't had in the past, and we're much more prepared to step over the precipice. Timeline.
The timeline.
Wait a minute.
Yes.
Okay. So, Pam, as a council member, I'm going to be the council member now. I've been working probably since 1990 in different arenas with you on this, and boy, I feel your pain, and I feel it more over the last 12 years being one of the advocates for home visiting. And my organization is the reason that we had McVie and have that funding, and we'll continue to work on that. And I will tell you that simplifying is so important, and one of the best simplifications for me as far as an advocate would be not to go in and say, I want X millions for healthy families, or whatever, is that I want X million for home visiting, and how can we do this together and jointly. And my frustration over the years has been that pulling apart and that siloing and that fighting and that arguing of where we need to be and how we need to do it. And that doesn't serve our families very well, and it disappoints me greatly. Fortunately, I think we are one of those states, as Lynn pointed out. We do a lot, and we do a lot better than a lot of states. But can we do better, and should we? Absolutely. And the evidence is very clear on home visiting that it does reduce child abuse and neglect. It does reduce poverty. It does take care of a lot of the issues that we keep talking about over and over and over. And with 90% of brain development in the first 5 years, let me tell you, the bang for the buck is here. And I'm committed to get this, not back on a shelf, but forward and over the mark. I mean, before I retire, I keep telling Janet, before I retire and join her, I want to see that these programs are working together and we're hitting those families, and that's a passion for me.
I just want to do a quick plug for McVie. The work that's been happening has needed a vehicle around which to launch that work, and this budget note has provided that vehicle. So I really appreciate those of you that worked on it from the leadership perspective, because we're queued up, we're ready to go and use it as a foundation. So we're going to be presenting this, I believe, at the next Oregon Health Policy Board meeting, and then this work group will continue to draft up the recommendations and provide it to the leadership to take back to the two bodies for consideration and approval, and then present it to the legislature in February. March through June, we're going to be finalizing the recommendations and developing the implementation plan, and then kick off July 1st with the recommendations and begin the implementation plan.
So what I thought would be a group that would meet 3 times will probably meet through July, Janet.
More times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, Lynn, you'll get double dosed, but
It's okay.
okay.
Did you have something before we move on?
I just, because I'm trying to figure out, I think it kind of was what Bobby was saying around the intersection of the hubs and everybody else, because, just in conversations with childcare providers, who try to help families connect to early intervention, and, they'll even host meetings at the child care, at their home to help families connect. There, because I'm not terribly familiar with this side of things, how this intersects. So I think a bit more of education for me. I don't know if there's a document that would be easy for me to read, or what that would look like. And then I'm just going to, again, throw out that we need significant funding and investment in these services, because that's one of the things that I'm hearing, and we've heard from other in our community engagement outside of mixed delivery, but like when we were in Tillamook, it was that early intervention needs money, that there's a high demand for the services, and that they can't get specialists fast enough and get families and children the services they need fast enough. So I'm just going to continue to ask for lots of money.
Yeah, you and me
Before we move on, I just want to actually recognize and say thank you to Janet. I think you might be the hardest working, quietest council member in show business. Janet serves on this committee. She's also on the Preschool Promise Committee. I mean, everything that we've discussed today, where there's been a committee meeting to work through hard issues, Janet's there, and you're just always there and always contributing. And I know, but I mean, I just was thinking about that when I saw I see your name on every list, and I wanted to just say thank you publicly.
Thank you.
I know you're retired, but I think we're actually putting you to more work as a retired person than when you weren't. So
And we're
thank
counting
you
on you
for
to come
that.
up with the answer, because you're everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, I had it yesterday. David told me it wouldn't work, so.
All right.
Anyway, I hope that's
okay. Yeah, really.
I just wanted to say thank you.
Closing, Pam, and I know you want us to move on, but I want to thank everybody that's been involved in the last, the 3 meetings. And it's, I'm going to use Janet's line. She came to me after one of our meetings, and she goes, oh my gosh, she says, we have these 3 agencies and all these people in the room. And it's the first time I've ever seen them all nodding their heads up and down in agreement. And we're working really, really hard. I mean, that's one of the focuses, is to work really, really hard at bringing everybody together to the table to get to the right decision. Because we can make a decision and these guys may not like it, or DHS, and we're right back at the starting gate. So we have to be at the table together. And I appreciate and thank them all for being there.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for giving us the updates. All right, council members, next on our agenda is the consent agenda. And we have several items in the consent agenda. We'll take a motion to approve all of them together. It is round 3 of the Healthy Families Oregon recompete recommendations. Those came to you. That was the most recent addition to your information that came to you. It's also the written committee reports from Best Beginnings and Child Care and Education Committee, and also the retreat minutes, or the minutes from our retreat back in September. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I have one piece, we have one more RFP to go.
Oh, thank you. Yep.
And,
Healthy Families.
I'm sorry, yeah, Healthy Families RFP, and that's Douglas Klamath Lake, and we hope to have that shortly, but they're going out, when are they going out?
December.
December.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And then we're done.
And that's it. That's the last one. Okay, great.
Until it's time to do it again.
No.
All right.
Erin will quit if we do that.
Any other conversation or discussion, council members? Motion on the floor to approve the consent agenda. Any other discussion? Any objection to approving the consent agenda? Thank you. Consent agenda is approved. All right, so we're going to turn to public testimony. We have 3 folks who have signed up for public testimony, and I don't know the order because Alyssa's racing it to me right now. Thank you. All right, so first on our list is Mary Lee, and introduce yourself for the record, and then council members, while she's making her way, Alyssa is going to pass out a piece of written testimony that we received from a member of the public.
Marilee Haas, Executive Director of Oregon Association for the Education of Young Children. I will be very brief. I have one question, 2 comments, and 1 appreciation. The first question was on the teen parent to child development special populations rules you adopted. And I may have missed it in Bobby's presentation, but on page 7, there's a new change to the rule saying that the children must be enrolled in child care services provided by a facility certified or registered by the Office of Child Care, which is located on the same campus as the Teen Parent Child Development Educational Program. Does that mean if they get the parenting part of the program, because I couldn't find that, but they can get their GED high school somewhere else?
Yes. It means, after much discussion and exploration from what we determined is the high school is not going to enroll them if they're not delivering some service to them. So, but taking the parenting class would be sufficient to establish them as a high school student. And so that's the intent of that, but we brought it forward because then the high schools are going to be bumping against their completion rate because they're enrolling a student who they know is not going to complete, and it's going to make them look bad. So I only brought it forward so that we could deal with it later as a policy level on the council. As a council, we couldn't fix it through rules.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to see what
Yeah.
the intent or the plan was around that, because I'm
Right.
aware of students that they have the program on one campus, and then the student goes to one of
Right.
the other places. And I'm
Right.
going, how are they going to make that work? So
Right,
it's
so
the
we wanted them
parent
to
ed
get
part that
the
has to be.
parenting with the childcare in the same place while they do their other education somewhere else.
Okay. I have 2 requests of the committee as you're looking at the mixed delivery preschool promise. That you look at 2 things. One, because transportation, and you called it out as a key issue, I would like that to be considered specifically in the hub readiness statements, that they have looked at how they're going to provide transportation, such as collaborations with the public schools, special ed, Head Start, others, in order to address that critical transportation issue for access. So just a suggestion. And then the other is, again, with the whole waiver process, as you're looking that any waiver should have a specific plan. I think you already mentioned that. And that they be equitably applied to both those preschool childcare programs and the public school programs or Head Start programs as well, and not make assumptions that, well, that program has it covered, we don't need to worry about it, that it be equitably applied to all programs. And then finally, an appreciation. I really appreciated your discussion today on the the importance of having that cultural competency and institutional capacity to address some of those really tough issues. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have next Hillary Smith, followed by Dana Hepper. And while Hillary is making her way forward.
Did you think you were just signing
Oh,
in?
I'm sorry. Did you think you were signing in? Oh, apologies. All right, Dana, it's you. Surprise!
I know.
And well,
Lots to say, but not today.
while Dana is making her way up here, let me just acknowledge into the record that we've received a piece of written testimony from Russ Cromer of the Bend area regarding the preschool promise and sustainability of the business model of the preschool promise, essentially. Thank you.
Dana Hepper, I'm the Director of Policy and Program at the Children's Institute, and we worked very actively on the preschool promise legislation that you are all figuring out how to implement, and we're right there with you. And I just wanted to say two things with regard to the bachelor's degree. Charles McGee raised the question of legislative intent, and so just wanted to quickly share my perception of the conversations that were happening among the crafters of the legislation and the legislators as it was moving through the building. One is that we just really wanted to put a stake in the ground that would help us raise salaries in early childhood to livable wages. And we saw the bachelor's degree as a key component of doing that. Now, that doesn't mean there's still obviously so many places where early care and education providers in Oregon won't have a bachelor's degree and won't be moving up the salary schedule in the way we hope to see happen in Preschool Promise, but we want to begin to set that precedent in the space as a hope that it leads the way for the entire profession. And the second, I think, deciding factor in having that bachelor's degree in the legislation was that we wanted something to be a leverage point in the higher education system to ensure that there was adequate motivation to create the diverse pathways needed to get providers to the bachelor's degree and have those bachelor's degree not just be a piece of paper, but a relevant document that means that you've learned something through that process of attaining it. And so we felt like if that wasn't embedded in the legislation, we could just kind of continue to kick that higher ed ball down the road as well. So that's all. I just wanted to share that in response to Charles's question about legislative intent.
Sure, Curtis.
Yes, please, Terry.
Did I miss something? Is the thought that if people have a degree, they will be paid higher? Yes. Okay, well, so I'm just asking, before that is proposed, you may want to look for evidence, because as a public health nurse, I will let you know that I am paid less with 30 years of experience than a brand new grad today. So with an associate's degree, and I have a bachelor's degree. I just want to know if we're going to put that forward, that statement forward, that the higher education is going to lead to higher wages, we need some evidence, because in my life, not the truth. So I just really have concern that when we start moving that path, that language, that we're going to raise the standard of living for people doing this work. I'm concerned it's not there.
So council members, we're going to move to closing reflections. Thank you for council. So Martha, do you want to? You have your hand up.
Yeah, I do, because I want to address the salary issue, and I think it's something that we need to be very cognizant of. I don't think it's right that you're not making what you should be paid to do. And in early childhood, that seems to be the standard. It's okay to pay them subpar. And I would agree with Dana that it may not be the best mechanism, but it is a mechanism to start to get people to think that way. Our home visiting RFP, when we sent that out, we were very explicit to hope to get them to raise their salaries. We couldn't tell them they should or they needed to, but with most of those home visitors applying for a lot of the same services that they're telling their clients to get is just flat wrong.
One example, we're doing the RFP, we think we've actually made progress, is an example in Harney Grant County, we had a .5 home visitor. We want 2, they raised the salaries, we have 5 applicants and 1 has a master's, and they're going to pay more down there. So I think that we have to make early childhood just as important as a doctor, a lawyer, you name it, because these are, if we don't do right by our kids here, we're never gonna get ourselves out of the holes that we've dug. So to me, pay parity is extremely important, and we need to keep an eye on that.
Oh, I'd agree. I'm not sure that I'd like to see the evidence that the education requirement leads to pay parity. I just haven't ever seen anything.
We know that in pre-K, if I could, we do know that in pre-K, that some of those teachers that do have BAs are not doing as well as they should, but they have also, the research is also showing that they're getting paid less, and we're getting the bottom of the barrel. So we need to pay in order to get the good people, or they do move on. Home visiting, a lot of our folks start out, they do a year, that's their first job, and then they move on to something else that's paid better. So pay does make a difference in getting your quality.
All right. Other closing reflections from our meeting today, or anything looking forward, council members?
And I was, again, for that keynote speaker at the conference on Monday, one of the things that in their program, they call everybody a scholar, or you're on the way to be a scholar, and from infancy on, Scholar Academy, it's all about education. And one of the things that really struck me was she told a story of talking to a mother, and they're saying, don't you want your kids to go to college? And that's their first thing, you want your kids to go to college. Well, here's how you're going to get there. And this mother said, I guess I never thought my kids were worth college. And I guess from the time I was the first person in my family to go to college, but from when I was young, I knew I was going to go to college. And that is one of the things that I think we really have to address, is expectations for people and support for them that their children can accomplish. The child was 3. She had I think a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and she said, I never thought my kids were worth college. And I think that's partly what we're about, is changing those perceptions and helping families understand everyone is worth education, wherever that will take you.
Other closing reflections, council members?
I highly valued the direct focus on children and families and communities that permeated our conversation today. The agenda, sometimes we have to get kind of far away. Today, we've seldom moved very far from what is going to change for children and families. And I don't know, I appreciated, it felt like, wow.
Yeah.
We're on
That's
topic.
why I'm on this council.
Yeah, we're on topic. So, anyway.
Good, thank you. Any other closing reflections, council members? Okay, our next meeting is scheduled to be a call in December. I can't remember the date. Do you remember off the top of your head, or Alyssa probably does? No? All right.
It should be on everyone's calendar.
Yeah.
I'll follow
She'll
up
send
with
out
it.
8 emails.
Yeah, right. So it should be on your calendars. We planned in advance, the 10th. Thank you very much. So on December 10th.
So
phone
that
call.
is a meeting.
It is a meeting, if.
Tentative in what I got.
I think we need to keep it, just given today's conversation, it will be short. But there are a couple action items that we'll need, like adopting your strategic plan is one of them. We'll keep it to an hour or 2 hours maximum.
Okay. All right, thank you all. So we will talk to you on the phone on December 10th, and we are adjourned.